If you ask me what kind of revenge is the most satisfying, I'll tell you it isn't the heart-wrenching sobs or the hysterical accusations. It's walking in wearing the custom suit he once said you could never afford, on heels he once said you couldn't handle, and standing before him, using the law he prided himself on, to utterly dismantle him. My name is Alara Vance. I'm 33 years old, the chief legal counsel for the multinational law firm Sterling & Gould. In my 7 years of practice, I've handled 237 cases with a near unbeaten record. Today is the 10-year anniversary of my breakup with Julian Croft. It is also the first time we will face each other in court. The case itself isn't complicated. My client, an American electric vehicle startup named Apex Motors, is in technology acquisition talks with a century-old German auto conglomerate. Julian and his firm, the Croft firm, are representing the German company's investment interests in the United States. Simply put, my side wants to buy their technology, and his side wants to drive up the price while stuffing the contract with a litany of predatory clauses. Things like staggered payments for technology transfers, separate licensing fees for patents, and even demanding that any subsequent improvements developed independently by the American side would become their property. Signing that contract would be no different from selling ourselves into servitude. My client approached several domestic law firms, but no one dared to take the case. Why? Because the Croft firm's reputation is too formidable. Julian Croft, at just 34, made equity partner. He's handled no fewer than 100 cross-border M&A deals. The industry has a nickname for him: the scalpel of the M&A world. Fast, precise, ruthless. He's never failed, but he probably never imagined that one day the scalpel would be broken. Before today's hearing, the two sides had already spent 6 months in settlement negotiations. I know Julian's strategy well: delay. Drag it out as long as possible. Apex Motors can't afford to wait. The factory's production lines have been calibrated. All they need are the German technical blueprints. Every day of delay costs them a 7-figure sum. If he drags it on long enough, my client will run out of patience and sign whatever terms are offered. He's used this tactic many times, and it's never failed him. So today, I have no intention of playing his game. At 8:40 a.m., I led my team into Courtroom 3 of the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York. My assistant, Chloe, placed the prepared materials on the plaintiff's table, one by one. 19 binders, lined up in a row, each marked with a colored tab. Chloe whispered to me, "Alara, the gallery is packed." I glanced over. It was true. The first 3 rows were nearly full. There were people from the Croft firm, as well as a few familiar faces from the industry. Most conspicuous was the woman sitting in the middle of the second row. She wore a Chanel tweed suit, her hair impeccably styled, clutching a Hermes alligator Birkin. She sat with her legs crossed, her chin slightly raised, sizing me up with a condescending gaze, a faint, ambiguous smile playing on her lips. Victoria Croft, Julian's mother, the true power behind the Croft firm, the woman who forced Julian to break up with me. 10 years, and she hadn't changed. She had simply aged into a caricature of herself. She probably thought today's case was another surefire win for her son, and had come to watch the celebration. I withdrew my gaze, picked up my insulated tumbler, unscrewed the lid, and took a sip of water. Chloe leaned in again, her voice even lower. "Alara, that lawyer, Mr. Croft, he keeps looking at you." I didn't look up. "Let him look," I said. At 8:50 a.m., the clerk announced all rise. The presiding judge and 2 other judges entered. The presiding judge was a man named Wallace, a veteran jurist in his late 50s with silver hair and gold-rimmed glasses. He looked amiable, but everyone in the industry knew he was notoriously sharp when it came to contract disputes. Judge Wallace struck his gavel. "Please be seated." The case of Apex Motors versus Vogel Industries for contract dispute is now in session. We will begin by verifying the identities of the parties present. Julian's side stood up first. He wore a navy custom-tailored suit, his tie a classic Hermes design. His hair was perfectly coiffed, making him look dashing and confident. As he stood, he even glanced in my direction, a smile on his face that he clearly found charming. "Your Honor," Julian said, "I am Julian Croft, lead counsel for the defendant, Vogel Industries, and its sole representative in the United States, the Croft firm. Here are my authorization letter and professional credentials." The bailiff took his documents and presented them to the judge. Judge Wallace reviewed them, nodded, and then turned his gaze to me. "Counsel for the plaintiff, The moment I stood up, I felt the air in the courtroom freeze. The smile on Julian's face, in the fraction of a second it took for him to recognize me, shattered like a mirror struck by a stone, cracking from the center outwards. He knew me. Of course he knew me. But he had probably never, in his wildest dreams, expected to see me here, to see me like this. I wore a charcoal gray suit dress, my hair pulled back completely, revealing my entire face. Compared to 10 years ago, my jawline was sharper, my eyes deeper set. With makeup, my aura was significantly more commanding. Victoria Croft's Hermes bag nearly slipped from her grasp. I didn't even glance at them. In a voice that was neither high nor low, neither rushed nor slow, I said, "Your Honor, I am Alara Vance, lead counsel for the plaintiff, Apex Technologies. My bar number is 2015013. My firm is Sterling & Gould, New York headquarters. The letter of authorization and a copy of my credentials have already been submitted to the clerk." Judge Wallace reviewed the documents. "Miss Vance, your firm is based in New York?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "This representation constitutes a cross-jurisdictional legal service. I have already filed a motion for admission pro hac vice with the New York State Court. The relevant documents are attached to the letter of authorization." Judge Wallace examined them closely and nodded. "The paperwork is in order. You may proceed." Then he looked at me again. "Miss Vance, you don't seem familiar. Have you practiced in this district before?" I smiled. "No, Your Honor. This is my first case in a domestic court." After saying this, I deliberately turned to look at Julian and added, in the tone of someone commenting on the weather, "But I've been preparing for this case for 6 months." Julian's Adam's apple bobbed. He was rattled. The look of absolute certainty on his face had completely crumbled, replaced by a panicked disbelief I had never seen on him before. He even subconsciously loosened his tie. Judge Wallace said, "Very well, let's proceed to the discovery phase. The plaintiff may state your claims and the factual basis for them." I stood up and picked up the first folder. Procedurally, the claims were already outlined in the complaint, but Judge Wallace asking me to state them again in court was an opportunity for both sides to show their hands. And today, I had more than one card to play. I said, "Your Honor, our claims are as follows. First, we request the court to find that the defendant engaged in malicious negotiation tactics and commercial fraud during the contract negotiations, and to order them to compensate our client for the resulting economic losses. Second, we request the court to find that the standard contract provided by the defendant contains numerous unconscionable and predatory clauses, and to legally nullify them." I paused, raising my eyes to meet Judge Wallace's. Third, we have substantial evidence proving that the defendant's lead counsel, Julian Croft, had a severe conflict of interest and engaged in unethical practices during these negotiations. We hereby move to disqualify Julian Croft from representing the defendant in this case. The courtroom erupted. Several people in the gallery stood up simultaneously. The team from the Croft firm looked aghast, their frantic whispers buzzing like a swarm of flies. Victoria Croft shot up from her seat, blurting out, "You're lying!" Judge Wallace struck his gavel twice. Hard. Silence in the gallery. Any further outbursts, and the bailiff will remove you from the court. The courtroom fell silent again. But it was a silence thick with undercurrents. Julian shot to his feet, his face ashen. "Your Honor, I object. The opposing counsel is committing slander in open court. She accuses me of a conflict of interest and unethical practices. I demand she present evidence." Judge Wallace adjusted his glasses, looking at me. "Miss Vance, this motion concerns the opposing counsel's professional ethics. It is a very serious allegation. What exactly do you mean by conflict of interest and unethical practices? Do you have proof?" "I do," I said. I picked up the second folder on the table and opened it. "Your Honor, please allow me to submit the first set of evidence to the court, marked as Plaintiff's Exhibits 1 through 5. The bailiff took the documents from my hand and presented them to Judge Wallace. I said, "Exhibit 1 is a memorandum of understanding for a technical partnership signed in March 2023 between the defendant, Vogel Industries, and another New York-based EV company, Synergy Drive. Exhibit 2 is a set of internal meeting minutes from Synergy Drive's board, which explicitly documents that Ms. Julian Croft served as legal counsel to both Synergy Drive and Vogel Industries between November 2022 and February 2023. I paused to give the judge time to review the materials. Then I continued, "Your Honor, this means that during the same period Mr. Croft was negotiating a contract with our client on behalf of Vogel, he was also providing legal services to a direct competitor in the same industry. Furthermore, Vogel Industries used the industry information and technical parameters obtained from Synergy Drive to implement targeted pricing and clause pressure against our client. My voice remained steady, calm, as if reciting a mathematical formula. According to the American Bar Association's Model Rules of Professional Conduct, specifically Rule 1.7, a lawyer shall not represent a client if the representation involves a concurrent conflict of interest. Mr. Croft's actions are a flagrant violation of this rule. I opened the third folder. Furthermore, Exhibit 3 contains all 11 revised contract drafts prepared by Mr. Croft for Vogel Industries over the past 6 months. Exhibit 4 is the internal review log from the Croft firm. These two documents clearly demonstrate that Mr. Croft deliberately inserted numerous unilateral and restrictive clauses detrimental to our client. The content of these clauses is highly consistent with the technical partnership memorandum between Synergy Drive and Vogel Industries. I stopped and turned to look at Julian. He stood there, his lips pressed into a thin line, a fine sheen of sweat beading on his forehead. I looked at him and, in a very calm tone, delivered the final line. Your Honor, this is not merely a matter of a conflict of interest. This is a classic case of corporate espionage, potentially violating antitrust laws. We reserve the right to report this to the Department of Justice. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Julian's face went from ashen to a ghastly white. He opened his mouth, trying to say, "I object," but the sound was stuck in his throat. Not a single syllable escaped. He was trembling. I could see it clearly. The hand holding his pen was shaking, the nib jabbing a black dot onto the paper. His assistant scrambled to his feet, his voice trembling slightly. Your Honor, we request a recess. The allegations made by the opposing counsel require time for us to verify and prepare a response. Judge Wallace did not answer immediately. Instead, he lifted his eyes from the documents and gave me a long, deep look. In that look, there was surprise, scrutiny, and a hint of an elder's appreciation for a promising junior. But more than that, there was the unmistakable glint of someone who realized this game was more interesting than he'd anticipated. Judge Wallace said, "Miss Vance, this set of evidence you've presented is quite extensive. I will need time to review it carefully." But he turned to Julian, his tone becoming more stern. "Mr. Croft, the opposing counsel has submitted black and white evidence. As the defendant's counsel, your eligibility to represent in this case is now genuinely in question. As per procedure, I must question you on this matter in court. Please answer truthfully. Are the facts just stated by Miss Vance true?" Julian took a deep breath, trying to make his voice sound composed. He said, "Your Honor, I admit that I did serve as legal counsel for Synergy Drive from late last year to early this year. But," the moment he said, "but," I knew he was about to start spinning a story. He said, "But my scope of representation was limited to Synergy Drive's labor and employment disputes. It did not involve any commercial contracts or technology-related business. I absolutely did not disclose any of Synergy Drive's commercial information to Vogel Industries. Miss Vance's accusations are a deliberate confusion of concepts and malicious slander." Watching his righteous act, I suddenly found it laughable. He was the same as he was 10 years ago, always finding 100 reasons to wash himself clean, even when he was clearly in the wrong. It was his mother who had torn up my acceptance letter in front of the entire university department, yet afterward he told me, "My mom was just looking out for me, just let it go." It was he who had dismissed me with a $300,000 check, yet he told others, "I gave her the best possible arrangement." Julian Croft, you are the same as you were 10 years ago, but I am no longer the Alara who could be silenced by a single sentence from you. I stood up again, picking up the fourth folder. Your Honor, I request to submit the second set of evidence, marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 6. The bailiff once again came forward, took the thin document from my hand and presented it. I said, "Exhibit 6 is a transcript of 3 telephone recordings and a disc containing the original audio files. The recordings are dated January 17, February 5, and the 19th of February 2023. The two parties in the conversation are Mr. Julian Croft and Synergy Drive's then Chief Technology Officer, Mark Jensen." I glanced at Julian. His face had completely transformed. The ghastly white had become a deathly ashen gray. His lips quivered as if he wanted to say something, but his throat had gone completely dry. I said, "These 3 recordings clearly prove that Mr. Croft was not only aware of Synergy Drive's core technical parameters and business plans, but he also actively solicited an internal confidential document from Mr. Jensen titled Synergy Drive Vogel Tech Comparison Analysis. The content of this document has an over 80% overlap with the contract terms later proposed to our client by the defendant. I closed the folder. Your Honor, in the face of this irrefutable evidence, Mr. Croft's earlier claim that his representation was limited to labor disputes is completely baseless. He was lying in open court. Victoria Croft shrieked from the gallery, "You're talking nonsense. Where did you get those things?" Before she could finish, Judge Wallace's gavel struck 3 times. Hard. Thud, thud, thud. "Bailiff, please escort this member of the gallery out." 2 bailiffs immediately moved forward, flanking Victoria Croft by the arms. She struggled, her hair disheveled, the expensive Chanel suit wrinkling in the scuffle. She screamed, "On what grounds are you throwing me out? I am Julian Croft's mother. I am the head of the Croft firm." No one paid her any attention. The bailiffs unceremoniously dragged her toward the door. As she passed me, she glared at me with eyes that wished to devour me whole and hissed, "Alara Vance, you will regret this. You will pay for this." I smiled slightly and, in a volume only she could hear, said, "Miss Croft, there are steps outside the courtroom door. Be careful not to fall." Her face turned the color of liver as she was pushed and shoved out of the courtroom by the bailiffs. The door closed behind her with a heavy, muffled thud. Judge Wallace took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, clearly exasperated by the sudden turn of events. He put the gavel down and said, "Given the significance of the evidence submitted by the plaintiff, this court hereby declares a postponement of the trial. Mr. Julian Croft," he looked at Julian, his tone severe, "until this court has made a ruling on your eligibility to represent, you are not to participate in any subsequent litigation activities in this case, in any form, nor are you to have contact with any case materials. Do you understand?" Julian stood there, a soulless statue. His expensive suit, his exquisite Hermes tie, now looked like a colossal joke. His lips trembled, and he managed to squeeze out 2 words. "I understand." Judge Wallace nodded. "Good. Court is adjourned. You will be notified." He struck the gavel, and the sound echoed in the courtroom for a long time. I stood up and collected the folders from the table, one by one, my movements unhurried, as composed as they were before the hearing began. Chloe's hands were shaking with excitement. She whispered, "Alara, you were amazing. You knocked him out in the first round." I didn't respond, just handed her the last folder. After packing everything, I turned and walked out of the courtroom. As I passed the defendant's table, Julian suddenly spoke. His voice was hoarse, like sandpaper on sheet metal. "Alara." I stopped but didn't turn around. He asked me, "Where did you get that evidence?" I said, "Legal channels." He said, "Impossible. The matter with Synergy Drive and Mark Jensen, even my own assistant didn't know. How could you have gotten a recording?" I finally turned to look at him. We were less than 3 feet apart, so close I could see the new fine lines around his eyes, and the shock and confusion churning within them. 10 years. 10 years ago, when he stood in the rain and broke up with me, I cried until I nearly passed out. 10 years later, he stood in a courtroom, drenched in a cold sweat, asking me where I got my evidence. Fate is a funny thing. I said, "Mr. Croft, when you were acting as legal counsel for Synergy Drive, did you often eat in their company cafeteria?" He was stunned, unsure why I was suddenly asking this. I said, "There was a dishwasher in the kitchen of the Synergy Drive cafeteria. Her last name is Vance." His pupils contracted violently. I said, "That was my mother. You ate in that cafeteria for 3 months and never once gave her a second glance. But every time you made a business call, you never bothered to avoid being overheard." I smiled, a faint, cold smile. "You thought a dishwasher wouldn't understand legal terminology, but you didn't know that her daughter was a graduate of Harvard Law School. That every year, when she came home for the holidays, she would help her wash dishes and talk about the cases she was handling. She doesn't know the statutes, but she knows what words are important. What words are worth money." The color on Julian's face could no longer be described as ghastly white. That handsome face was now completely twisted, his lips trembling, his eyes so red they looked as though they might start bleeding. He gripped the rail of the defendant's box, his voice nearly breaking. "Alara, you were setting this up from the very beginning." I didn't answer. I just glanced at my watch and then said something completely unrelated to the case. "I have to leave now to make it in time to pick up my kids. Mr. Croft, if you'll excuse me." I turned and pushed open the heavy courtroom doors, walking out without a backward glance. My high heels clicked against the marble floor of the courthouse corridor, a crisp, rhythmic sound. Sunlight poured in from the window at the end of the hall, stretching my shadow long behind me. I did not look back. 10 years ago, when he left, I didn't try to stop him. Today, after winning my case, I certainly wouldn't stop to look at him. The real show was just beginning. He, of course, had no idea that everything that had just happened in court was merely an appetizer I had prepared for him. His mind was probably reeling, wondering why my mother was washing dishes in Synergy Drive's cafeteria, how the recording was made, who leaked the tech comparison analysis. The answers to those questions would keep him occupied for a good while. But by the time he finally figured it out, he would realize that the recording and the document were nothing. The real bombshells were currently sitting in the McDonald's across from the courthouse, each holding a McFlurry, waiting for their mother to get off work. As I walked out of the courthouse doors, Chloe caught up to me, looking at me with pure admiration. "Alara, that line you said just now about being just in time to pick up the kids from school was absolutely brilliant. You should have seen his face. It just cracked on the spot." I said, "Enough with the flattery, get in the car." Chloe opened the passenger door, then suddenly looked back at the courthouse. She lowered her voice. "Alara, do you think he'll come after you?" I said, "He won't." Chloe asked, "Why not?" "He looked like he had a million questions for you." I started the car, shifted into gear, and released the handbrake. In the tone of someone discussing the weather, I said one sentence, because what he's most afraid of right now isn't losing a case. It's losing the position he spent 34 years climbing to reach. Chasing after me to ask why would only make him lose it faster. Julian Croft valued his future more than anything, including our relationship 10 years ago. I didn't say that last part out loud. The car merged into the New York evening rush hour traffic, a river of red taillights. My phone rang. It was a voice message from our nanny, Maria. I played it, and my daughter's cheerful voice filled the car. Mommy, my brother got into another fight at school today." The teacher said a parent needs to come to the school tomorrow. Then my son's voice, coolly drifting in from the side. "Lily, are you an idiot? Mom said not to send voice messages when she's working." Then a burst of noise and scrambling as the two children bickered back and forth. Listening to them, the corners of my mouth curved up involuntarily. Chloe asked curiously from the passenger seat, "Alara, what you said in court about picking up kids, do you really have children, or were you just trying to provoke him?" I glanced at her. "What do you think?" Chloe shrank back in her seat, not daring to ask again. The car drove on as the setting sun dyed the entire city a golden red. The glass walls of the skyscrapers reflected the light. People came and went on the streets, waves of commuters pouring out of the subway entrances, their faces etched with exhaustion and the rush to get home. Like every other mother in this city, the end of my workday was a McDonald's with warm yellow lights, where two little people were waiting for me. But unlike them, I had just spent my day in court, personally dismantling the first half of their biological father's life. And this was only the beginning. If you asked me what the most important thing I learned at 22 was, I would tell you it was watching everything I had spent 4 years of my youth building get torn to shreds in the cold New York winter rain, and then wiping away my tears and telling myself from now on, no one else will ever control my life. I was 22 that year, a senior undergrad at NYU. Like every pre-law student, my dream was to get into an Ivy League law school. I started preparing for the LSAT in my junior year, spending every day in the library, grinding through practice questions and memorizing vocabulary. When I was tired, I'd nap at my desk, then wake up and continue. My roommate said I was crazy. A girl from an ordinary working-class family in a second-tier city who had never even had the money for a vacation to California. How could she possibly afford the $50,000 to $60,000 a year for Harvard Law School? I ignored them. The thing I was best at since I was a child was defying expectations. My father passed away my junior year of high school, liver cancer. From diagnosis to his passing was less than 3 months. Before he left, he held my hand and said, "Alara, your dad wasn't successful. I didn't save much for you. If you want to study, then study hard. Dad will be watching you from heaven." My mom worked alone on a production line in a food factory back home. Her monthly salary was $2,000 or $3,000. Every month, she sent me $1,500 for living expenses. I knew how she survived on the remaining few hundred. The cheapest vegetable dishes in the cafeteria, a meal for no more than $3. All the money she saved, she gave to me. So I studied with all my might. While others were out shopping, I was memorizing vocabulary. While others were dating, I was doing practice exams. While others went home for breaks, I was interning at a law firm near campus, serving tea, making copies, just to gain some practical experience. That's where I met Julian Croft. He was the only son of Victoria Croft, the director of the Croft firm. He was 2 years ahead of me and had already been an intern at his mother's firm for 2 years. He came to our school for a recruitment presentation, wearing a well-tailored white shirt, speaking eloquently on stage. The girls in the audience were mesmerized. After the event, I was helping the firm's administrator move tables and chairs. He passed by, suddenly stopped, and asked me, "You're a law student?" I said yes. He said, "That question you asked earlier about the bona fide purchaser doctrine, it was a very sharp angle. I haven't seen an analysis that deep, even in bar exam prep." I was stunned. There was a Q&A session that day, and I did ask a question, but the microphone was broken, and my voice was lost in the noise. I thought no one heard, but he had. Later, he started asking me out to dinner, to movies, to study together in the library. He was witty and from a wealthy family, having attended the best schools in New York his whole life. His perspective and knowledge were far beyond mine, but he never brought any of it up. When he was with me, he would even dress more casually, afraid of making me uncomfortable. I thought it was consideration. My roommate said I had hit the jackpot. Julian was handsome, from a good family, and incredibly capable himself. The entire law school was full of girls who would have thrown themselves at him, yet he had chosen me. I told her not to be ridiculous, but secretly, I was thrilled. He took me to see the skyline from the Brooklyn Bridge, pointing at the brightly lit skyscrapers across the river. "Alara," he said, "one day I'll be the best corporate lawyer in New York. I'll buy the tallest building and open a law firm on the top floor. You can be my partner." I laughed and said, "I would never work for you. I'm going to finish my studies at Harvard, come back, and open a firm even better than yours. I'll specialize in taking the cases you can't win." He pinched my nose and said, "Fine, then I'll see you in court." Back then, I truly believed we would walk this path together forever. In the second semester of my senior year, I started applying to American law schools. Julian helped me revise my personal statement countless times and ran mock interviews with me endlessly. His English was better than mine. He would cover every draft with dense red ink, not even sparing a single punctuation mark. The day the decisions came out, I sat in my rented room, clutching my laptop, and cried for a whole afternoon. Harvard Law School, a full scholarship for the 3-year JD program. Tuition and living expenses were completely covered, plus a $20,000 annual stipend. My mom was sobbing on the other end of the phone. "Alara, you've made it. Your dad is watching from heaven. Your dad must be watching." Julian was even happier than I was. That night, he took me to a very expensive restaurant to celebrate. He raised his wine glass and said, "I knew you could do it. Alara, you're the smartest girl I've ever met." I said, "I'll be back as soon as I finish in 3 years." He said, "Of course I'll wait for you. Who else would I wait for?" The meal cost over $400. When the bill came, my heart ached. He laughed and said, "This might be the last free meal a future Harvard Law great gets to eat. Of course, it has to be an expensive one." We laughed together. That was the happiest night of my life before I turned 22. And then, the rain began to fall. I remember it clearly. It was March 12th. A late spring chill had descended on New York, the temperature dropping into the low 40s. A cold rain fell from the sky, the wind whipping against my face like a knife. Julian had invited me to his home, saying his mother wanted to officially meet me. I was a nervous wreck, preparing for days in advance, trying on every piece of clothing in my closet. I finally chose a light gray sweater dress I had bought on sale. It had cost me an entire month's living expenses. I also bought a bouquet of carnations, having heard that elders liked them. Julian's family lived in a penthouse on Park Avenue, a doorman building with a canopied entrance. Their living room was larger than my entire apartment, with a crystal chandelier, leather sofas, and large oil paintings on the walls. Everything in it told me that the distance between him and me couldn't be bridged just by getting into Harvard. Victoria Croft sat in the center of the sofa, wearing a cashmere cardigan, her hair in a flawless updo, her makeup so perfect you couldn't guess her age. Next to her sat a middle-aged man I didn't recognize, who I later learned was another partner at the Croft firm, a Mr. Davies. I stood before the coffee table, respectfully handing her the flowers. "Hello, Mrs. Croft. I'm Alara Vance." Victoria took the flowers without even a glance. placing them on the sofa beside her. She looked me up and down for a few seconds. I'll never forget that look. It wasn't anger or disgust, but something even more humiliating, disdain. Like looking at an item in a display window that she would never, ever buy. She said, "Alara Vance, is it? Julian has mentioned you. Please, sit." I sat down, my hands on my knees, my back ramrod straight. Julian sat next to me and said with a smile, "Mom, don't be so serious. Alara's nervous. Let me tell you, Alara is incredible. She got a full scholarship to Harvard Law. Not many people in New York can do that." Victoria picked up an antique porcelain teacup from the coffee table, slowly took a sip, and then set it down. She looked at me and, in a tone one might use to discuss unpleasant weather, said, "Miss Vance, I know a little about your situation with Julian, but you're both still young. It's normal for young people to date and have fun. However, Julian is about to officially join the Croft firm. His father passed away early, and I built this firm with my own 2 hands. One day, it will be his." She paused, a slight curve on her lips. "Do you think a girl from that kind of family is worthy of the title, wife of the owner of the Croft firm? That kind of family." Those 4 words were like a knife, stabbing me right in the heart. My mother had stood on a factory production line for 20 years. The calluses on her feet so thick she couldn't cut them with scissors. She left for work at 6 a.m. and came home at 10 p.m., earning $2,000 to $3,000 a month, all of which she gave to me. With that kind of family's income, she had supported a daughter who got into Harvard Law School. And in your mouth, that's that kind of family. My fingers clenched on my knees, my nails digging into my flesh. But my face showed no expression. At 22, I had already learned one thing. Never show your wounds to the enemy. Julian was the first to get agitated. He said, "Mom, what are you talking about? What kind of family? Can't you see how brilliant Alara is? She got into Harvard on a full scholarship. Your own son didn't even get an interview at Harvard." Victoria didn't even lift an eyelid. She picked up her teacup and took another sip. Slowly, she said, "Brilliant? Getting into a good school is brilliant? Julian, you're too young. This society doesn't run on diplomas alone. Background, connections, resources, which of these does she have? Even if she graduates from Harvard, she'll just be a hired gun lawyer. What you need is a wife who can help you maintain your image, manage your connections. Not an employee." Then she turned to me, a hint of something I couldn't decipher in her eyes. Annoyance, perhaps, or a condescending pity. "Miss Vance, I'm not looking down on you. I'm just telling you a very practical truth. The clients of the Croft firm are all magnates worth hundreds of millions, even billions. Imagine, in the future, Julian takes you to a social event. Another wife asks what your parents do. How do you answer? That your mother washes dishes in a factory? Wouldn't that be a slap in Julian's face?" Every word she spoke was light and airy. Every word landed precisely on my most insecure spot. I opened my mouth wanting to say something, but what could I say? Everything she said was true. My mother did work in a factory. My family had no background, no resources, no connections. Apart from a Harvard acceptance letter I hadn't even received in the mail yet, I had nothing. Julian's face flushed. He shot up, his voice rising. "Mom, that's enough. I don't care about any of that. I'm marrying a person, not a facade." Victoria's expression finally changed. She slammed her teacup down on the coffee table with a harsh clang. "You don't care? You don't care, but I do. Julian, let me tell you. I struggled alone to build this firm. Are you blind that you can't see that? You think being a lawyer is just about legal skill? Without connections, without a network, you can't even get through the courthouse door. If you marry her, just see if those old clients will still give you their cases." Her voice wasn't loud, but every word carried an unquestionable authority, echoing in the spacious living room. Mr. Davies, the partner, nodded slightly beside her, looking deeply convinced. I sat there, like a rabbit thrown into a wolf's den, surrounded by sharp fangs with nowhere to hide. Then Victoria did something. She took a manila envelope from the side table, pulled out a piece of paper, and waved it gently. I recognized it. It was my Harvard acceptance letter. I had only seen the email from the school. How could she? I whipped my head to look at Julian. He avoided my gaze. Victoria placed the acceptance letter on the coffee table, tapping the gold-embossed Harvard Law School crest with her finger. In a careless tone, she said, "Harvard Law School is indeed a good thing. Miss Vance, you are very smart. I don't deny that. But smart people should do smart things. She looked at me, her gaze suddenly sharp. How about this? I'll give you two choices. First, you take this acceptance letter and go to America to study. I can pay for your 3 years of tuition and living expenses. The condition is that from this day forward, you cut off all contact with Julian. After you graduate, you can work anywhere you want, just not back in New York. Go wherever you want, just not back to New York. Second, she paused, a meaningful smile appearing on her lips. If you insist on being with Julian, fine. Then today, you will walk away from this opportunity yourself. Show me your choice. Then I'll arrange for you to work as an administrative assistant at the Croft firm. $4,000 a month. You can start by serving tea and making copies. If you perform well, I might consider letting you become a paralegal. The living room was silent for a few seconds. The hum of the heating, the sound of raindrops on the window panes, the distant noise of cars on the street, all these small sounds were suddenly amplified, mixing with the pounding of my heart until my eardrums ached. I looked down at the acceptance letter on the coffee table. The gold crest gleamed softly under the chandelier. The dean's signature at the bottom was a flamboyant scrawl. Harvard Law School. The lines of English were neatly arranged. Every letter represented my 4 years of effort, sweat, hope, and dreams. It was the fulfillment of my father's last words, Alara, if you want to study, then study hard. It was the hope my mother had saved up, bit by standing on a production line for 20 years, her feet calloused, eating $3 vegetable dishes. It was the only card Alara Vance had to play, having clawed her way from that small city to this moment. You want me to tear it up to serve tea? I suddenly let out a small laugh. At that moment, the 2-year-old Alara felt as if she had been struck by something, and also as if she had suddenly aged 10 years. I looked up, meeting Victoria Croft's eyes. Thank you for thinking so highly of me, Miss Croft, to even prepare 2 choices for me. My voice was calm, so calm it surprised even me. But I won't be choosing either of them. I reached out, picked up the acceptance letter from the table, folded it carefully, placed it back in the manila envelope, and tucked it into the canvas tote bag I carried. Victoria's smile froze. I stood up and looked at Julian, who had been silent this entire time. He was looking down, his hands clasped together, his knuckles white from the force. He wouldn't look at me. Julian, do you have nothing to say? He was silent for a long time. The heating in the living room was on full blast, but I felt a chill seeping out from my bones. The rain outside was getting heavier. The shadows of the trees on the floor-to-ceiling windows looked like grasping, clawing hands. Julian finally looked up at me. His eyes were a little red. His Adam's apple bobbed. His voice was hoarse, as if sanded down. He said, Alara, why don't you go to Harvard first? After 3 years, when you come back, my mom will have calmed down, and we can. I didn't let him finish. And we can what? I asked him. My voice wasn't loud, but he flinched as if he'd been electrocuted. We'll see. Are those 3 words your answer? He didn't reply. He didn't dare look at me. I suddenly felt that the person before me was a complete stranger, a world away from the young man who had stood on the Brooklyn Bridge, pointing at the lights and saying he would buy the tallest building. It turned out some people's courage only existed when their mothers weren't around. I picked up my tote bag and turned to leave. As I reached the door, Victoria called out from behind me, Miss Vance, wait a moment. I stopped but didn't turn back. Her high heels clicked on the wooden floor, the sound approaching. You showed some backbone just now. I admire that. But backbone doesn't put food on the table. She took something out of her purse and held it out over my shoulder, in front of my face. It was a check. $300,000, she said, her tone as flat as if she were haggling at a market. Take this money, consider it an investment in your future, a future that doesn't involve my son. You can use it to study in America or start a small business. The condition is the same. From today on, have no more contact with Julian. You and he are not from the same world. I finally turned and looked down at the check. $300,000, the amount written out in words. The official stamp of the Croft firm's financial department, Victoria Croft's personal signature. The handwriting was neat, the format professional. It was obviously prepared in advance. So this meeting, from start to finish, had been a meticulously planned humiliation. First, try to make me tear up my acceptance letter. If that didn't work, just throw money at me. I looked at the check and suddenly found it hilarious. $300,000. In the eyes of people like them, A normal girl's 4 years of youth, a sincere relationship, a crushed sense of dignity. It was all worth $300,000. I reached out and took the check. A look of expected victory appeared on Victoria's face. The smile held the superiority of a winner, and a certain, as expected contempt. She probably thought there was no one in this world that money couldn't buy. Then I did something. I didn't put the check away. I held up the pale blue piece of paper and waved it in front of Julian. He stood up from the sofa, his face a mask of ugly emotions. His lips moved as if he wanted to say something, but I didn't give him the chance. Julian, look closely. My voice was quiet but steady. Not a single syllable trembled. This $300,000 is an insurance policy your mother is buying for your conscience. You think this money can sever everything between us, so that when you think of this later, you can tell yourself, I compensated her, I don't owe her anything. But I'm telling you, what you lost today isn't $300,000. It isn't a girlfriend. You lost a lawyer who will one day beat you to a pulp in court. And a woman you will never be worthy of again. I folded the check, and then folded it again, and put it in the innermost pocket of my canvas bag. I'm taking this, I said. Not because I'm worthless, but because this is all you're capable of giving right now. As for the rest of what you owe me, I looked up, directly into his eyes. I'll come to collect it myself in the future. With that, I pulled open the heavy wooden door of the living room and walked out into the cold March rain. Behind me, I heard the sound of something shattering. It sounded like Victoria had thrown her antique teacup to the floor. It was followed by Julian's choked cry. Alara! Alara, wait! I didn't stop. The rain was heavy, cold as ice chips against my skin. I was soaked through in moments. The sweater dress clung to my body, cold and heavy. My canvas shoes squelched in the puddles. But every step I took was steady. It's a 15-minute walk from the Park Avenue penthouse to the subway station. For those 15 minutes, my mind was buzzing, replaying her words over and over. That kind of family. You're not worthy. Here's $300,000. When I reached the corner, I finally couldn't hold it in anymore. I crouched down by the side of the road under a tree, and wretched. Nothing came out. Acid burned my throat. Tears and rain mixed together, dripping from my chin to the ground. I couldn't tell which was which. I only knew I had never been so humiliated in my life. And I had never been so clear-headed. A man on an electric scooter passed by and stopped. Miss, are you all right? Need a ride to the hospital? I waved my hand, my voice hoarse. I'm fine, thank you. The man looked at me, probably used to seeing young people heartbroken in the rain. He sighed, left me with a take care of yourself, don't abuse your body, and rode off. The rain fell harder, shrouding the entire street in a gray mist. I don't know how long I crouched under that tree, so long that my legs went numb. Finally, I used the tree trunk to pull myself up. My phone vibrated in my tote bag. I took it out. It was a text from Julian. Alara, I'm sorry. I apologize on behalf of my mother. Give me some time. I will find a way to convince her. I stared at the words for 5 seconds, then blocked his number. A few seconds later, his messaging app icon flashed on the screen. A new message came in. I read the first few words and never opened it. Alara, please don't cash that check. What came after, I'll never know. Because I uninstalled the app. The subway wasn't crowded. I was dripping wet, leaning against the pole by the door, a small puddle forming at my feet. A woman across from me kept looking at me, her eyes a mix of pity and curiosity. I ignored her. My mind was fixated on one thing. When Victoria gave me the check, I had noticed a detail. The bank on the check was a specific branch of Chase Bank. The account number ended in 3/8. Next to the official stamp of the Croft firm's financial department, there was a small personal seal with Victoria Croft's name. This meant the check was drawn from her personal account, not the firm's business account. Why would a firm's director use a personal account to withdraw $300,000 instead of a business account? The question flashed through my mind. At the time, I didn't think much of it. But as it turned out, 10 years later, that tiny detail would become the final straw that broke the camel's back in court. That night, I went back to my apartment and came down with a high fever. 103.3 degrees. I was delirious, wrapped in a blanket, shivering in bed. My roommate was terrified and wanted to call an ambulance. I told her no, I just needed some fever reducer. The fever lasted for 2 full days and nights. During that time, I had a long dream. In the dream, Julian was standing by the East River, holding my Harvard acceptance letter, shouting something at me. but the wind was too strong and I couldn't hear a word. On the third morning, I woke up. The fever was gone. My pillow was soaked, whether from sweat or tears, I couldn't tell. I sat up, leaning against the headboard, staring at the newly clear sky outside my window. After a while, I reached for my tote bag on the nightstand, and from the innermost pocket, I took out the check, wrinkled from the rain. I smoothed it out on my lap. $300,000. Victoria Croft's signature. I folded it neatly. I didn't go to cash it. Instead, I tucked it into the pages of a civil law textbook. It wasn't that I didn't want the money, it just wasn't time yet. Then I picked up my phone and called my mom. When she answered, she spoke first, her voice full of laughter. "Alara, I was just about to call you. Guess what great job I found today?" I was taken aback. "What job?" My mom's voice was as excited as a child's. "I switched jobs. I'm not at the food factory anymore. I had someone help me find a new gig. At Synergy Drive, that big new energy vehicle company here. I'm washing dishes in the cafeteria. $25 an hour, plus full health benefits. That's way more than I ever made at the factory." I held the phone, and tears welled up in my eyes. She had worked at that factory for 20 years, for $2,300 a month. Now, she had a job that paid $4,200, and she was as happy as if she had won the lottery. She had no idea what her daughter had just been through, and I had no intention of telling her. I took a deep breath, trying to make my voice sound normal. "Mom, that's great. Don't work too hard. Take care of yourself." She said, "It's not tiring at all. The cafeteria work is much easier than the production line, and I get to see all these college students and engineers every day. They're all so sharp. Let me tell you, Alara, by the time you graduate from America, the money I've saved will be enough for a down payment on an apartment for you in New York." My tears flowed silently, but I forced my lips into a smile. "Okay, Mom. When your daughter makes it big, I'll buy you a big house in New York. You can sit on the balcony and sunbathe every day." My mom laughed so hard on the other end of the line she couldn't speak. Okay, Mom will be waiting." After hanging up, I sat on the bed, buried my face in my knees, and my shoulders shook as I cried silently. The sunlight came through the window, landing on the civil law textbook next to my pillow, the one with the $300,000 check inside. The gold lettering on the cover glinted in the light. I cried for about 10 minutes, then wiped my tears with my sleeve. From under my pillow, I took out the Harvard acceptance letter and carefully taped it to the wall by my bed. Then I started packing. My flight to Boston was already booked. August 20th. I had 5 months until then. In those 5 months, I had 3 things to do. First, get my health back. Second, finish the remaining credits for my degree. Third, I made a decision. I went to a clinic for a checkup, because I suddenly remembered that my period was almost 2 months late. That night, my roommate was out. I sat alone on the toilet, holding a pregnancy test. 2 lines, 2 clear lines. I turned the test over and over, even rereading the instructions on the box word for word, trying to find any reason to believe I had seen it wrong. There was none. 2 lines meant pregnant. I placed the test on the sink and leaned against the cold tile wall, slowly sliding to the floor. 22 years old, just had my face slapped with $300,000 by my ex-boyfriend's mother, just got my Harvard acceptance letter, just decided to start a new life on the other side of the ocean. And now, the pregnancy test was telling me I was pregnant. God, was this some kind of sick joke? I sat on the floor for a long time, so long the bathroom light automatically turned off, plunging the room into darkness. In the dark, I placed a hand on my lower abdomen. I couldn't feel anything, but I knew something was growing there. Julian's child. No. Not Julian's child. My child. Alara Vance's child. From this moment on, this child had nothing to do with that man. I fumbled to my feet, turned on the light, and looked at the young woman in the mirror with swollen eyes, messy hair, and a pale face. I said one thing to her, my voice quiet but firm. "Alara Vance, you are a mother now. So you are not allowed to cry anymore. Not allowed to be weak. Not allowed to look back. From now on, every step you take must be worthy of this little thing inside you." The girl in the mirror looked at me and slowly nodded. At the end of August, I dragged 2 suitcases onto a flight to Boston alone. At customs, the officer asked my purpose for coming to the United States. I said, "To study." "Harvard Law School." He raised an eyebrow. "You'll have to work hard. That's the hardest law school in the world to get through." I smiled, one hand unconsciously resting on my stomach. For the 11-hour flight, I didn't sleep for a single minute. It wasn't that I didn't want to. The morning sickness was too severe. I ran to the restroom 7 or 8 times until my stomach was empty, filled only with acid. The woman in the next seat asked with concern if I had morning sickness. I said yes. I didn't tell her I wasn't just sick. I was pregnant. At an altitude of 30,000 feet, carrying a pair of twins still in the cellular division stage. And the man who gave me these twins was probably in a high-end restaurant in New York at that moment, having dinner with some debutante his mother had arranged, talking about a suitable marriage, about the future of the Croft firm. He would never know that the moment he handed my acceptance letter to Victoria Croft, what he truly lost. And the day I returned, I would make him pay it all back, piece by piece. If you asked me how long a secret can be kept, I used to think that if you hide it deep enough, it could be for a lifetime. Later, I learned that there are no walls that can't be breached, especially when the son in a pair of fraternal twins looks like he was carved from the same mold as his biological father. 3 days after that court hearing, Julian called me 47 times. I remember the number clearly because for every call, my assistant Chloe made a tally mark in her notebook. It filled 2 whole pages. She said, "Alara, maybe you should just answer." I said, "No need." When he called the 48th time, I answered. The other end was silent for a full 5 seconds. Then, Julian spoke in a voice I had never heard before. "Alara, we need to meet." It wasn't a question, but a statement. This man, who I had just publicly stripped of his dignity in court, still thought he had the right to speak to me in that tone. I said, "Mr. Croft, if you're calling about the Vogel case, I have already filed a motion to disqualify you. If you have something to say, have your successor contact me." He was silent for a moment, then his voice suddenly dropped. "It's not about the case. It's personal. Alara, our business." Alara. Hearing him say that name, after 10 years, after half a world between us, after a life-or-death battle in court, it still made my fingers tighten slightly around the phone. I leaned against the floor-to-ceiling window of my office, watching the boats glide slowly down the East River. In a tone like I was reading a calendar, I said, "Mr. Croft, our personal business was concluded 10 years ago. Your mother bought you a clear conscience for $300,000. For you to come looking for me now to reminisce, don't you think you're devaluing that money?" I could hear him take a deep breath on the other end. I could tell he was suppressing his emotions. 10 years had passed, but that habit of his hadn't changed. Whenever I hit a nerve, he would take 3 deep breaths before speaking. 1, 2, 3. "Alara, I know I wronged you back then. Whatever revenge you want, I'll take it. You ambushed me in court. I have nothing to say. But I beg you, tell me one thing." His voice suddenly tensed, as if he was using all his strength to control something. "That day, outside the courthouse, you said you were going to pick up your kids. You're married?" I didn't answer. A cargo ship on the river sounded its horn, the low sound piercing the glass and echoing in the office. I listened to Julian's suppressed breathing on the other end and suddenly found it amusing. 10 years ago, he sat silently in his living room, letting his mother humiliate me with the most vicious words, not daring to make a peep. Now he was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on, desperately trying to pry an answer out of me. People are strange creatures. I said, "Whether I'm married or not, what does that have to do with you?" He said, "It does." I asked, "What does it have to do with you?" He fell silent again. This silence was longer than any before, so long I was about to hang up. Then he finally spoke, his voice so hoarse it sounded like something was blocking his throat. "I saw you that day. After court, I followed you for a while. You parked in front of a McDonald's, and 2 kids ran out. A little girl with pigtails, and a little boy in a blue down jacket." He paused as if organizing his thoughts, or trying to suppress something about to erupt. "That little boy, Alara, he looks exactly like me." After he said that, it was my turn to be silent. What was meant to be, was. For 10 years, I had hidden them. I was even careful not to let the children be exposed to his circles, posting all their photos only on private social media accounts. But of all the things I had calculated, I hadn't calculated that he would be in the gallery that day. I hadn't calculated that he would wait for me outside the courthouse. And I certainly hadn't calculated that he would follow me to pick up my children. In that instant, my mind raced. How much had he seen? Just a glance from afar, or a close encounter? Did he talk to the children? Did he take a picture? But my voice remained calm as if I were discussing a sales contract. "Mr. Croft, there are 330 million people in this country. Plenty of people look alike. Are you so desperate for a child that you've started claiming random kids on the street? He said, Alara, don't play games with me. That boy looks to be about 10 years old. That means he was born the year you went abroad. If you do the math, we were still together when you conceived him. My fingers tapped lightly on the window pane, making a soft thudding sound. I said, what evidence do you have that the child is yours, just because you saw him from a distance? He said, then I demand a paternity test. I laughed. A short, soft snort from my nose. It was enough for him to hear the ridicule on the other end. Mr. Croft, you've been a lawyer for over a decade. You shouldn't need me to school you on the law. According to basic civil procedure, anyone petitioning for a paternity test must provide necessary evidence. You don't even have a photograph. Based on a glance from afar, which court do you think would entertain your request? He didn't speak. I said, is there anything else? If not, I'm hanging up. He said, there is. I'm waiting. Alara, if you had my child without telling me, if I have a child that you've hidden from me for 10 years, I will not let this go. I don't care if you're a chief counsel. I don't care how many cases you've won. I will get to the bottom of this. His voice was trembling, but not with anger. It was more like the full-body tremor of someone who suddenly discovers a crucial chapter of their life is missing. I sneered internally. Now you're panicking? You weren't panicking when your mother tore up my acceptance letter. You weren't panicking when she wrote me that check. You weren't panicking when you ignored me for 10 years. Now you see a child with me and you start to panic? I said, investigate all you want. But Mr. Croft, let me remind you of something. You are still under court investigation in the Vogel case. Whether you can even keep your law license is up in the air. If you still have the energy to investigate me, I'll be waiting. Then I hung up. The office was quiet, save for the soft hum of the air conditioning. I stood by the window, watching the sunset paint the river a brilliant orange, the smile on my face slowly fading. He was investigating. He was really investigating. I put my phone on the desk and pressed the intercom to call Chloe in. When Chloe opened the door, she must have been startled by the look on my face. She asked cautiously, Alara, what's wrong? I said, I need you to look into something for me. Find out if anyone from the Croft firm, or anyone connected to Julian Croft has been to my son and daughter's school recently, or has been asking around the neighborhood. Chloe paused. You're worried about him? I didn't answer, just gave her a look. Chloe had been with me for 3 years. She knew exactly what that look meant. She nodded immediately. I'll get on it right away. As she reached the door, I stopped her again. Also, contact Lily and Leo's school. Tell the head teacher and security that if any strangers come to the school looking for the children or asking about them, they are to give no information and notify me immediately. Chloe said, understood. After she left, I picked up my phone again, found a contact named Maria, and called. Maria was the nanny who helped me with the children. She started with us when they were in Boston and came back with me when I returned to the US. Maria answered, Alara? I just picked up Lily and Leo from school. What's up? I said, Maria, have there been any strangers lurking around the neighborhood recently, or has anyone tried to talk to you? Maria thought for a moment. Now that you mention it, there was someone. Yesterday afternoon, when I was taking Leo to his piano lesson, there was a man standing at the entrance to our community, well-dressed. He kept staring at Leo. At the time, I thought he might be a kidnapper, so I grabbed Leo and hurried away. My heart sank. Maria said, What is it, Alara? Did something happen? I said, It's nothing. Maria, from now on, be extra careful when you're picking up and dropping off the children. Don't let any strangers get near them. If anyone tries to talk to you and asks about the children, don't say anything. Just call me immediately. After hanging up, I stood by the window for a long time. The sunset slowly faded, painting the skyline of Manhattan a deep crimson. One by one, the lights in the office buildings across the way flickered on, like pieces on a chessboard being pressed down. I picked up my phone, then put it down, picked it up, and put it down again. Finally, I sent a message to a number. My lawyer. What we talked about last time. I think it's time to prepare. Less than 30 seconds after I sent the message, a simple reply came back. Okay. Did you think I hadn't anticipated this day? From the moment I first heard my children's heartbeats in that Boston hospital, I knew that one day, Julian Croft would learn of their existence. So I spent 10 years preparing. The children were born in the United States. Their birth certificates have no father listed. When I returned and registered them, I found the most professional lawyer, my senior from Harvard, Catherine, the director of Sterling and Gould's New York office. She was the only person I trusted after returning. She handled all the legal paperwork, ensuring that under no circumstances could Julian Croft legally take the children's custody. I even prepared for the worst-case scenario, a paternity test. I never doubted that if it came to that, Julian would find out the children were his. DNA doesn't lie. But DNA can only prove he is the biological father. That's it. Between being a biological father and a real father lies a chasm he can never cross. A chasm he dug himself, 10 years ago. The next morning, Chloe reported back. Someone had indeed been to the school, not Julian himself, but a young lawyer from his firm. He had a business card from the Croft firm and approached the school's dean, claiming to be conducting a survey on extracurricular activities at international schools. He asked a lot of questions, all circling back to Leo and Lily's family situation. After listening, I took a sip of my coffee. And then? Chloe said. The dean didn't engage. We had already instructed the school that all visitors must register and be vetted. He didn't even make it past the front gate. I nodded. Keep an eye on it. For the next week or so, Julian didn't call me again. But I could feel him, like a shark that had scented blood, circling my life. The building security told me someone had been taking pictures at the entrance and was chased away. Maria said that when she took Lily to ballet class, a man stood outside the dance studio for the entire lesson, peering through the glass. Even the front desk at my gym said a man had come asking about my weekly schedule. He was mapping my life. More than a decade as a lawyer hadn't been for nothing. He knew how to gather information. But he had likely forgotten one thing. His opponent was me. On the second weekend of December, I took the children for a photo shoot. Not a professional studio session, but a series of lifestyle shots with the city skyline at night as the backdrop. The two of them were laughing hysterically in front of the waterfront railing. I stood behind them, smiling as well. Afterward, I posted one of the photos, a shot of the three of us together, to my social media. I set the visibility to a specific group. In that group, there was only one person, Julian Croft. The caption was just 2 words. My family. Less than 10 minutes after I posted it, his call came. This time, I didn't answer. I let the phone vibrate on the table, picked up my glass of red wine, and swirled it slowly. The view outside was beautiful. December in New York was cold, but the air was clean, the visibility high. The spire of the Empire State Building twinkled in the night. The phone vibrated for a full 3 minutes, then stopped. Then it started vibrating again. This time, it was Catherine. I answered. Catherine said, Alara, that social media post, was that for him? I said, Catherine was silent for a second. You're provoking him. I said, yes. She asked why. I put down my wine glass and looked out the window. Catherine, he's investigating me. The school, the neighborhood, the gym, he's everywhere. He's buzzing around me like a fly, and it's annoying. Instead of letting him sneak around, I'd rather just open the window and let him see exactly who's standing inside. The other end was silent for a few seconds. Then Catherine's voice became serious. Alara, have you thought about what he'll do next, now that he's seen the photo? I said, he will definitely sue. Catherine said, for what? I said, to confirm paternity, and then to apply for custody. Catherine took a soft breath on the other end. Are you sure you can win? I smiled, taking a USB drive out of my drawer and twirling it in my hand. Catherine, in these 10 years, when have I ever done something I wasn't sure about? On that USB drive was an audio file. During that storm 10 years ago, Julian had chased after me and said many things. Among them was a sentence he thought I had forgotten, but I remembered it clearly. Because I had recorded it, word for word, with the recording pen he had given me. What he said was, don't worry about a baby. Even if you had one, I wouldn't want it. At the time, he probably just meant to say he wouldn't entangle me. But in the eyes of the law, that sentence was a voluntary waiver of parental rights. He didn't know I had recorded it. He didn't even know I had a recording pen in my tote bag that day. It was a habit I developed while interning at a law firm. Record all client meetings to help with taking notes later. I had brought it to his house that day, intending to record Victoria's words as evidence, in case she really forced me to tear up my acceptance letter. I never expected to record something far more valuable than a complaint letter. A piece of evidence that had been waiting for 10 years, for a lawyer who had never lost. In mid-December, New York had a sudden snowfall. It was rare for the city to get much snow in recent years, but that day, it was particularly heavy, falling all day long. By night, the entire city was covered in a thin layer of white. The kids were ecstatic, building a snowman in the community garden. Lily took off her red scarf and wrapped it around the snowman. Leo, next to her, said with a look of disdain, "If you give it to him, what will you wear tomorrow?" Lily said, "The snowman will give it back to me tomorrow. He won't be a freeloader." Leo rolled his eyes and muttered, "Childish," but still stuck the carrot he was holding onto the snowman's face for a nose. I stood on the balcony watching them, holding a cup of hot tea, the white mist of my breath dissipating in the cold air. Maria said from beside me, "Alara, it's cold out here. Come inside." I said, "It's fine. I'll watch for a bit." Then my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I recognized it instantly. It was the front desk of the Croft firm. I had saved the number in my phone all those years ago and never forgot it. I answered, but didn't speak. A woman's voice came from the other end. It was an older Victoria Croft. She said, "Alara Vance. It's Victoria Croft." I said, Her voice was older than it was 10 years ago, but it still carried that same condescending tone, as if speaking to a subordinate. "Alara," Julian told me, "when you went abroad, were you already pregnant?" I took a sip of my tea, silent. Her voice rose slightly. "I'm asking you a question. Are those two children Julian's or not?" I slowly placed my teacup on the balcony railing, watching the two children chase each other around the snowman below. In a very soft voice, I said, "Miss Croft, 10 years ago you said something to me. Do you remember?" She said, "What?" I said, "You said he needed a wife who could manage his public image and social connections, not an employee." The other end fell silent. I said, "Now I'm returning that sentence to you. Miss Croft, my children need a father who is worthy of them. Do you think a lawyer who has been disqualified by the court, a person being investigated by the Bar Association for professional misconduct, is worthy of being my children's father?" Victoria's voice suddenly became shrill. "Alara Vance, don't be so arrogant. You think just because you studied in America for a few years, you can look down on everyone? Let me tell you, if those two children are truly of the Croft bloodline, I will fight for them with my last breath." I didn't let her finish. "Miss Croft, you don't need to use your last breath. I'm about to take my son and daughter out for hot pot. On a cold day like this, arguing on the phone is less satisfying than a few plates of good food. If you really want to fight, tell your son to prepare his lawsuit. But I must remind you of one thing." I paused, watching as Lily fell in the snow below, then got up, brushed herself off, and giggled. "Your son once said, in his own words, that even if I were pregnant, he wouldn't want the child. The recording of that sentence has been in my evidence locker for 10 years. Miss Croft, you've been a lawyer your whole life. You should know what that sentence means in a court of law." The other end of the line was silent, a long, long silence, so long I thought she had hung up. Then Victoria spoke, her voice suddenly weary, as if all her bones had been removed. "Alara, what do you really want?" I said, "What do I want?" "Miss Croft, 10 years ago you gave me a check for $300,000 and told me to never have any contact with your son again. I took the money and kept my promise. For 10 years, I studied, worked, and raised my children in America. I never once contacted your son. It was your son who, after being defeated by me in court, secretly followed me to pick up my children, then came to question me, harass my life, and harass my children." My voice was calm from start to finish, but every word was a stone, thrown back with precision. "Miss Croft, the question you should be asking isn't what I want. You should be asking what your son wants, and whether he's worthy of it." Then I hung up. The hot pot restaurant was steamy and bustling. The two children sat across from me, each with a bowl of sesame dipping sauce. Lily was placing slices of lamb into the pot one by one, counting as she went. 1 slice, 2 slices, 3 slices. Leo tapped his bowl with his chopsticks. "Lily, can you hurry up? I'm starving." Lily said, "What's the rush? A watched pot never boils." Leo rolled his eyes. "There's no tofu in this pot." I sat across from them, watching them bicker, and couldn't help but smile. Lily suddenly looked up, her eyes identical to mine, looking at me. "Mommy, this afternoon, a grandma called my name at the entrance to our building." My chopsticks paused. "What grandma?" Lily tilted her head, thinking. "A very nicely dressed grandma. Her hair was curly. She asked me my name." how old I was, and where I went to school. Maria, sitting beside me, blanched. Alara, I didn't see anything like that when I picked them up today. I held up a hand to stop her, then continued in the gentlest tone. Honey, did you talk to her? Lily shook her head proudly. No. The teacher at school said not to talk to strangers. I grabbed my brother and we left. But the grandma shouted something after us. I didn't hear what. I reached out and stroked her hair. You did the right thing. Mommy will get you some shrimp paste. Lily cheered. Leo, who had been quiet the whole time, was fiddling with his chopsticks. I noticed his expression and asked, Leo, what's wrong? He looked up, his small face, which bore a 7/10 resemblance to Julian, set in a serious expression that didn't match his age. He put down his chopsticks, crossed his arms, and leaned back in his chair. He looked at me with his Julian-like eyes. Mom, are you hiding something from us? The hot pot bubbled, the white steam rising and blurring the children's faces. I looked at him through the mist, momentarily at a loss for words. Leo said, I saw that, Grandma. She looked a little like the man in the picture. My heart skipped a beat. Leo was talking about something from 6 months ago. It was the first and only time I had shown them a picture of Julian. It wasn't some sentimental moment. I was preparing materials for the Vogel case, and the children ran into my study. Lily pointed at Julian's picture on the screen and asked who it was. I didn't say anything at the time. Leo glanced at it, said nothing, and left. He asked nothing, but he remembered the face. A 10-year-old with a memory like that. Just like his mother. I put down my chopsticks and looked into Leo's eyes. Son, what do you want to ask? Leo bit his lip, silent for about 10 seconds, then said, Is that man my dad? Lily, beside him, suddenly stopped gnawing on her corn, her eyes wide as she looked from her brother to me, her mouth forming a perfect O. Her own father was always busy and out of sight, and now, suddenly, a new father was about to pop out of her brother's mouth. For a 10-year-old girl, this was clearly too much information. I said his name, Leo. His eyes were slightly red, but his expression was stubborn, his chin slightly raised. I knew that angle all too well. It was the same angle I used every time I faced an opponent in court. Mom, just tell me, is he or isn't he? I looked at him. The steam from the hot pot was still rising. The other patrons in the restaurant were lively, their glasses clinking. But at our small square table, the air seemed to have frozen. I took a deep breath and decided, in that moment, not to hide it anymore. I said yes. The corn in Lily's hand fell with a plop into her bowl, spattering sauce onto her white sweater. Leo didn't move. He blinked, his eyelashes fluttering. Then he asked a second question. Then why doesn't he come to see us? I said, because he didn't know you existed before. Leo pressed. Then why didn't you tell him? I put down my chopsticks and looked him in the eye, my tone even, because he isn't worthy. Leo was stunned. In his 10 years of life, the word mother had always been gentle, patient, never speaking a harsh word. But now, the woman sitting across from him was using the words not worthy to describe his own father, her tone as cold and hard as a scalpel fresh from the freezer. Lily whispered from the side, Mommy, what does not worthy mean? Before I could answer, Leo spoke first. He turned to his sister, his tone preternaturally serious for his age. It means he's not qualified. Like when you fail a test and the teacher won't let you move up a grade. Lily nodded, as if she understood. Then she asked, So, what grade did Daddy get on his test? Leo said coldly, 0. The restaurant lights reflected in the two children's faces, one innocent, one stern. Looking at them, a wave of indescribable emotion washed over me. 10 years ago, in that Boston hospital, when the nurse placed 2 tiny wrinkled bundles on my chest, I had sworn to the pale ceiling of the delivery room that for the rest of their lives, Alara Vance's children would not need anyone to bestow fatherly love upon them. I could give them double the love, double the protection, double of everything. Now, the man who had been absent for 10 years suddenly wanted to come back and reap the rewards. Life doesn't work that way. The rest of the hot pot dinner was quiet. Leo didn't bring up the topic again, but I knew he was turning it over and over in his mind. That was his personality, just like mine. He could hold the weight of the world inside and digest it himself, silently. After we got home, I bathed them and tucked them into bed. Lily fell asleep quickly, but Leo lay with his eyes open, staring at the ceiling. I sat on the edge of his bed and touched his forehead. Can't sleep? He was quiet for a moment. Mom, will he come looking for us? I said maybe. He asked, What do we do then? I looked at his eyes, so much like Julian's, and said, word by word, son, you need to remember something. In this world, not everyone who knocks on your door deserves to be let in. If he comes, Mom will be at the door. You don't have to worry about anything. Just study hard, practice your piano, play your soccer, let the adults handle adult problems. Leo looked at me, and something flickered in his eyes. Then he nodded, pulled the blanket up, turned over, and closed his eyes. I left the children's room, gently closing the door behind me. I leaned against the hallway wall, my eyes closed, for a long time. At the end of the hall, the living room TV was on, playing some entertainment news. I vaguely heard a few words, something about a holiday movie, some young actors, box office numbers. I didn't pay much attention until the host said a name. Recently, the highly anticipated holiday comedy Family Fun released its latest poster. Besides the A-list stars, 2 young children on the poster have drawn particular attention. According to the studio, the brother and sister duo, who play the children of the male and female leads, were selected from a nationwide casting call for amateur actors. The 2 children's natural and spirited performances have become a major highlight of the film. I shot my eyes open and rushed to the living room. The TV screen was displaying a movie poster. In the center, 3 adults were beaming. In front of them, on either side, stood a boy and a girl. The boy, in a red sweatshirt, had a cool expression. The girl, with 2 buns on her head, was smiling so wide her eyes crinkled into crescents. It was Leo and Lily. I grabbed the remote and turned off the TV. Then I picked up my phone and dialed a number. The call connected, and a cheerful, middle-aged man's voice came through. Alara, long time no see. What made you call me? I said, Lee, when was the Family Fun poster released? Lee said, just this afternoon. What's up? Your 2 kids were fantastic, by the way. The edited footage looks amazing. I was just thinking of sending you tickets for the premiere. I took a deep breath, my voice low. Lee, our contract had a clause stating that the children's images could not be used in any outdoor advertising or public promotional materials. That includes posters? Why wasn't I consulted about this? Lee heard the tone of my voice and paused. Alara, the marketing team handled the poster directly. I didn't even review it. But posters are within the scope of our contract, aren't they? I said, Article 27 of the contract, regarding the use of promotional materials, defines the scope as the film's official social media accounts and affiliated media's print and digital reports. It does not include outdoor posters and television commercials. Lee, you're a veteran in the film industry. You should know the difference. The other end was silent for 2 seconds. Then Lee's voice became cautious. Alara, did something happen? You seemed happy when you agreed to let the kids act. Why the sudden? I cut him off, my voice rising involuntarily. Lee, I know this isn't your fault. But please, have the marketing team pixelate the children's faces on the poster. All materials that have already been distributed, recall them if you can. If you can't, then replace the image. Lee sounded troubled. Alara, that's a bit sudden. The premiere is next week. How am I supposed to explain this to the marketing team? I looked at the black screen of the TV, my mind doing a quick calculation. Today was December 18th. Julian must have seen it. Even if I tore down every billboard in New York right now, it would be too late. I said, forget it. Don't recall them. But I need you to do me a favor. Remove the children's names from all promotional materials. Just keep their character names. Lee said, that I can do. But Alara, can you tell me what's really going on? I said, I'll treat you to dinner sometime and tell you in person. After hanging up, I sat on the sofa for a long time. The living room was dark, with only the light from the street lamps filtering through the curtains, casting a dim yellow patch on the floor. I closed my eyes, and Julian's face, upon seeing that poster, appeared in my mind. He would definitely recognize them. The little boy in the red sweatshirt, with his defiant expression, looked exactly like his childhood photos. Victoria had once shown me a family portrait of Julian at 6 years old. The little boy in that picture was a spitting image of Leo on the poster today. Genetics. You can't hide it. My phone screen lit up. It was a message from Catherine. Just an image, a screenshot of a trending topics list. Number 38. Family Fun twins are so cute. My temples throbbed. Catherine followed up with a text. Alara, I just received a lawyer's letter from the Croft firm. Julian is formally requesting to establish paternity. I stared at the words for a long time, then slowly typed back a reply. Good. Let him come. After sending the message, I flipped my phone over, screen down, on the coffee table. I sat alone in the darkness, listening to the second hand of the clock on the wall tick by. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Back in Boston, during my most difficult days, I couldn't even afford prenatal checkups. My landlord kicked me out for having a baby in the apartment. I dragged my suitcases for 3 blocks in the Boston December cold, finally spending the night in a 2-4-hour Starbucks. The 2 infants, wrapped in swaddles, slept on my left and right legs. I will never forget the cold of that night. And Julian, on that cold night, in his heated New York apartment, was probably dreaming of a brilliant future. Now he wants to come and claim his children. Fine. Let him come. See you in court. I, Alara Vance, have never lost a case. This one will be no exception. If you ask me when a man is at his most pathetic, I will tell you it is when he realizes that what he threw away 10 years ago has turned to gold, and he gets on his knees, trying to pick it back up. Julian's lawyer's letter arrived at the end of December. It was on official stationery from the Croft firm, red letterhead, gold seal, in a manila envelope delivered by a special courier to the front desk of Sterling and Gould's New York office. When Chloe handed me the letter, her fingers were trembling. Alara, they're really suing. I opened the envelope, glanced at the contents, then placed it on my desk, and continued drinking my coffee. Chloe stood beside me, looking at me in disbelief. Alara, aren't you worried? I said, worried about what? She said, he's petitioning to establish paternity and demanding visitation rights. If the court accepts, I put down my coffee cup, picked up the letter, and read it again from start to finish. The wording was impeccable, a testament to the Croft firm's skill. It cited various sections of the domestic relations law, from paternity confirmation to visitation rights. The legal citations were pristine, the tone neither servile nor overbearing. It looked like a perfectly normal legal document. But I saw the problem. Nowhere in the entire document was the word custody mentioned. Julian knew that applying directly for custody was suicide. To be absent for 10 years and suddenly show up wanting to take the children, no court would support that. So his strategy was to first confirm paternity, then obtain visitation rights, and then, step by step, encroach. A frog in slowly boiling water. The strategy itself wasn't flawed. The flaw was that his opponent was me. I put the letter on my desk and called Catherine. Catherine, you received the letter from the Croft firm, right? Catherine said, I did. What's your plan? I said, what do you think? I could hear Catherine rustling papers on the other end. She said, this case is both simple and complex. The paternity issue. A DNA test will settle it. There's no stopping that. But visitation and custody are another matter entirely. Julian hasn't fulfilled any parental duties for 10 years. Under those circumstances, it's impossible for a court to just grant him custody. The problem is, she paused, Julian is a partner at the Croft firm. He's spent over a decade cultivating relationships within the New York legal system. His connections are deep. If he calls in a favor, and the case lands in the hands of a sympathetic judge, the outcome could be unpredictable. I laughed. Catherine, you forget what I do for a living. I've already prepared the motion to dismiss for lack of jurisdiction. Julian filed in New York, but my permanent residence and the children's legal residence are in Massachusetts. According to the principle of jurisdiction, this case should be heard by the Massachusetts Family and Probate Court. Even if it were to be handled here, it should be in the court of my legal residence. Catherine was silent for 2 seconds, then laughed. Alara, you leave no stone unturned. I said, because I didn't wait 10 years to capsize in a ditch. The jurisdictional challenge was my first move, but not my only one. Julian thought he was going to fight a conventional custody battle. That was naive. I was going to make him understand that from the moment he had that letter delivered to the front desk, he hadn't entered a civil suit. He had entered a completely one-sided war. Over the next week, I did 3 things. First, I formally filed a motion to dismiss for lack of jurisdiction in the New York court, requesting the case be transferred to the Massachusetts Family and Probate Court. The grounds were threefold, and all were solid. The children's birthplace was the U.S., their legal and primary residence was the U.S., and their main environment for the past 10 years had been the U.S. The New York court had no jurisdiction over this case. Second, I had Catherine submit a formal statement to the court, attaching the full contents of that recording from 10 years ago. In the recording, Julian explicitly said, even if there's a child, I won't want it. The audio file was notarized, the timestamp intact, with no signs of editing. I requested the court to include this evidence in the case file as a factor in considering Julian's eligibility to even apply for custody. Third, I contacted my legal team in Boston and had them simultaneously initiate a parallel proceeding in the U.S. They filed for a temporary restraining order in the Massachusetts Family and Probate Court, prohibiting Julian from contacting or approaching the children during the case. Once approved by the Massachusetts court, this order would be transmitted to New York. At that point, Julian would be legally barred from approaching Leo and Lily, even within New York. A three-pronged attack, each one aimed at his weak points. After Catherine reviewed the 3 documents I sent her, she replied with 4 words, "You are a monster." I screenshotted those 4 words and saved them. Then I replied to Catherine, "Let him see what kind of dance a monster can do." The hearing for the jurisdictional challenge was held in mid-January. That day, Julian wore a black overcoat and a gray cashmere scarf, still looking like an elite lawyer. But his face betrayed him. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his cheekbones were more prominent than they were at the last hearing. Victoria Croft was not in the gallery. The shadow of being escorted out by bailiffs must still be lingering. A jurisdictional hearing isn't a formal trial, so the procedure is relatively simple. Each side presents its arguments, and the judge makes a ruling. As the respondent, I only needed to prove one thing. The New York court had no jurisdiction over this case. The presiding judge was Judge Harmon of the New York Family Court. He reviewed my motion, then looked up at me. "Miss Vance, I've read your motion. But you must know, the petitioner, Julian Croft, is a U.S. citizen with a fixed residence in New York, and the 2 children are currently only temporarily studying and living in New York for the duration of this corporate trial. Under these circumstances, on what grounds do you argue that this court has no jurisdiction?" I stood up. "Your Honor, there are 3 grounds. First, according to the Uniform Child Custody Jurisdiction and Enforcement Act, UCCJEA, jurisdiction is determined by the child's home state, which is where the child has lived for at least 6 consecutive months before the proceedings. While the children are temporarily attending school in New York, their home state, legal residence, and long-term domicile are all in Massachusetts. Their presence in New York does not constitute a legal residence for jurisdictional purposes. Second, the children were born in Boston, Massachusetts, and are U.S. citizens. According to principles of domestic and international law, cases involving the identity and welfare of minors should primarily be adjudicated by the courts of their home state or country of habitual residence. Third, and most importantly, I pulled a document from my folder and handed it to the bailiff. This document is a confirmation of parallel proceedings from the Massachusetts Family and Probate Court. The Massachusetts court has officially accepted the related case and, 3 days ago, issued a temporary restraining order. According to the principles of judicial comity, to avoid conflicting judgments from 2 courts on the same facts, this court should suspend its proceedings and await the final decision from the Massachusetts court. Judge Harmon took the document, his brow furrowing as he read. He took off his glasses, wiped them, and put them back on, reading the document again from top to bottom. The courtroom was silent for a few seconds. Then Julian shot to his feet, his voice an octave higher. "Your Honor, I object. The opposing counsel is deliberately creating jurisdictional obstacles. She knows the children are living and studying in New York, yet she runs to Massachusetts to file for a restraining order. This is a clear abuse of legal procedure." Judge Harmon looked at him, his tone flat but with an edge of authority. "Mr. Croft, she followed proper legal channels. The documents are complete, the procedures are in order. If you have an objection, you are free to hire a lawyer in Massachusetts and file a motion to vacate the order. But in my courtroom, when she presents official documents from another state's court, I cannot pretend I haven't seen them." Julian's face flushed. He took a deep breath, reining in his emotions, his voice tight with a barely contained desperation. "Your Honor, even if there is a jurisdictional dispute, the confirmation of paternity is a separate request. I move to first conduct a judicial paternity test between myself and the 2 children. This procedure is independent of jurisdiction and can be carried out at any stage." Judge Harmon looked at me. "Miss Vance, what is your opinion on this request?" I stood up, unhurried. "Your Honor, we do not object to a paternity test." The entire courtroom was stunned. Julian stared at me, his eyes wide, clearly not expecting me to agree so readily. His assistant was scribbling furiously, his hand shaking. I said, "However, we have 2 conditions." Judge Harmon said, "State them." "First, The testing facility cannot be chosen unilaterally by either party. We request that the court appoint an independent, third-party forensic lab. Second, once the results are out, they cannot be disclosed to any third party without my consent, nor can they be used as evidence in any other legal proceedings. I paused, turning to look at Julian. Can Mr. Croft accept these conditions? Julian stared at me for a full 5 seconds, probably trying to calculate my real intentions. I could guess what he was thinking. Alara agreed to the test so easily. Is it a trap? But he had no other choice. To confirm paternity, he had to do the DNA test. It was unavoidable. My conditions, though strict, were not unreasonable. An independent lab, confidentiality, these were standard procedures. He gritted his teeth. I can. Judge Harmon nodded. Very well. The court appoints the Forensic DNA Laboratory at Boston University's School of Medicine as the testing institution. The entire process of sample collection, transport, and testing will be handled independently by the lab. The results will be submitted to this court in a sealed envelope. Neither party may disclose the results without the court's permission. Is that understood? He said. Understood. I said, understood. Judge Harmon struck his gavel. So be it. Until the test results are available, this case is stayed. You will be notified. When I walked out of the courthouse, a light snow had begun to fall again. It was rare for a New York winter to be this cold. The snow was fine, like flour, dusting down from the gray sky, landing on my hair and shoulders with a cool touch. Julian chased after me from behind. He came down the courthouse steps and called my name through the snowflakes. Alara. I stopped and turned. He stood about 10 feet away, his overcoat collar flipped up by the wind, one end of his scarf dangling. Snowflakes dusted his hair and shoulders, a thin layer of white. The way he looked at me was different from in the courtroom. The aggressive edge was gone, replaced by something I couldn't quite name. Confusion, perhaps, or exhaustion. He said, "Why did you agree to the paternity test?" I said, "You wanted the truth, didn't you? I'm giving you the truth." He was silent for a moment, then took a step forward. I took a step back. He saw my movement and stopped, a bitter curve on his lips. He said, "Alara, I don't understand. If the children are really mine, why did you hide them from me for 10 years? Why didn't you tell me?" I looked at him, at this Lee, 4-year-old man standing in the snow, asking me a question I found utterly laughable. "Julian, you asked me why I hid them for 10 years. Let me ask you a few questions." I said, 10 years ago when I flew to Boston for 11 hours, pregnant, where were you?" He said nothing. After I got to Boston, I was 8 months pregnant, studying and preparing for final exams. When I couldn't take it anymore, I would lie down on the floor of the library bathroom for a while. "Where were you?" His lips tightened. When the children were born, they were premature. Together, they weighed less than 5 pounds. They were in an incubator for 20 days. I ran to the hospital 3 times a day to deliver breast milk, taking 2 buses each way. I stood at the bus stop in the freezing cold, my hands and feet numb. "Where were you?" I put my hands in my coat pockets, my tone as flat as if I were narrating someone else's story. But every word hit him squarely, draining the color from his face bit by bit. When the children were 1, they both got pneumonia. The wait at Boston Children's Hospital was 8 hours. I held 2 feverish children, 1 on each side, and sat on a plastic chair in the hospital corridor for an entire night. I had a paper due the next morning. I wrote that paper by the hospital bed, watching the monitors. I didn't even have time to cry. "Where were you?" Julian's Adam's apple bobbed. His eyes were red, his lips moved, and he squeezed out 3 words. "I didn't know." "You didn't know? You say you didn't know?" I laughed, a short, light laugh, like a snowflake melting in my hand before I could see it. "Julian, it's not that you didn't know. You simply never wanted to know. The day we broke up, when your mother gave me that $300,000, what did you say? You said you would apologize to me on her behalf. You said you would find a way to convince her. And then what? In these 10 years, did you call me once? Send me one message? You didn't even ask once, is Alara doing okay at Harvard?" He swayed, as if he had been hit hard in the chest. Snowflakes landed on his eyelashes. He blinked, and they melted into water, trickling down the corners of his eyes. I couldn't tell if it was melted snow or tears. I said, "You think I didn't tell you for 10 years to get revenge on you? You're wrong. I didn't tell you because you never asked. You didn't not know you had a child. You just never thought to ask. A man who hasn't contacted me once in the 10 years since we broke up. What right do you have to stand here and ask me why I hid it from him? His eyes were completely red. His voice was so hoarse it was barely a sentence. Alara, I held up a hand to stop him. Mr. Croft, there's no need to say anything. The paternity test will give you the truth. But that's just the biological truth. As for the rest, what you owe me, and what you owe the children, it can't be erased with a few words. Let's go. It's cold out. I turned and walked towards the parking lot, my heels leaving a clear set of footprints in the thin snow. From behind me his voice came, scattered by the wind, but the last few words still reached me. Alara, if the test shows they're my children, I won't give up. I didn't turn back. I didn't stop. I know you won't give up. I never expected you to. But you will soon understand something. The position you spent 10 years climbing to reach, the law firm your mother spent a lifetime protecting, all the things you are so proud of, they mean nothing to me. If you want to fight, then let's fight. The paternity test was scheduled for early February, just after the New Year. The whole city was still in a lazy holiday mood. I didn't go to the appointment myself. Catherine took the children. Before they left, I sat them down on the living room sofa. I had prepared a fruit platter for them, with dragon fruit and kiwi cut into small pieces, with colorful little forks stuck in them. Lily sat cross-legged on the sofa, her two small braids swinging. Leo sat up straight, his arms crossed, his small face so serious he looked like he was about to attend a business negotiation. I said, "Tomorrow, Aunt Catherine will take you to a place. A doctor will gently swab the inside of your mouths with a cotton swab. It won't hurt, just for a second. The swab will have some of your saliva on it, and the doctor will take it for a test." Lily tilted her head. "A test for what?" I hesitated for a second. Leo, sitting beside her, answered for me in a cold voice. "To see if we're that man's children." Lily's mouth formed a perfect O. Then she turned to me, her eyes, identical to mine, looking at me seriously. "Mommy, if the test says we're his children, will he take us away?" I pulled her into my arms, feeling her small, soft, warm body, her breath smelling sweet like dragon fruit. I rested my chin on the top of her head and said softly, "No one can take you away from Mommy. No one." Lily nodded, reassured, and went back to her fruit. Leo didn't move. He looked at me and said, "Mom, will they tell us the results?" I said yes. He asked, "If he really is our dad, do we have to call him Dad?" I looked at his face, so much like Julian's, at those eyes, almost identical to Julian's but a million times clearer, and said, word by word, "Son, the title Dad isn't given by DNA. It has to be earned with time and love. He hasn't earned it, so you don't have to." Leo nodded and picked up his fork to eat his fruit. He ate his dragon fruit with intense focus, bite by bite, unhurriedly, just like when he does his homework. The test results took 15 days. During those 15 days, I went to work as usual, attended court, held meetings, and handled my other cases. The Vogel case was paused after the jurisdictional hearing, but I had several other cross-border projects moving forward. I was busy from morning till night, leaving at 8 a.m. and returning at 9 p.m. By the time I got home, the children would have already bathed and changed into their pajamas, playing games on the living room floor. Chloe said I was using work to numb myself. I said it wasn't numbing, it was habit. This was how I had lived for the past 10 years, raising children and fighting cases simultaneously. I never had the luxury of being lazy. One Julian Croft wasn't enough to disrupt my rhythm. One afternoon in late February, Judge Wallace's clerk called. He said the sealed test results had been delivered to the court. He asked both parties' counsels to appear in 3 days to have them unsealed in person. 3 days later, I walked into the courtroom again. This time, there were a few new faces in the gallery. Victoria Croft sat in the front row, on the far right, wearing a deep purple cashmere coat. Her makeup was lighter this time, but the pretentious air she carried hadn't diminished. Next to her sat a middle-aged man I didn't recognize, who looked like another partner from the Croft firm. Catherine sat on the left, with Chloe beside her. In the third row of the gallery, there were a few men in suits, presumably from Julian's side. Julian stood not in the defendant's counsel's spot, but as the petitioner himself. Next to him was his hired lawyer, a middle-aged man named Harrison, who was also said to be a prominent figure in the New York legal community. Judge Harmon entered. "All rise. Be seated." He said, "Regarding the petition to confirm paternity between the petitioner, Julian Croft, and the respondent, Alara Vance. The forensic report has been prepared by the Boston University School of Medicine's Forensic DNA Laboratory and delivered to this court under seal. I now ask the clerk to unseal the document in court and deliver the findings to both parties. The clerk took the white, sealed envelope from the file, carefully cut it open, and pulled out the thin document inside. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the rustle of the paper. Victoria gripped the armrest of her chair. Julian's hands were clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. Catherine glanced at me. I showed no expression. The report was just 2 lines. Line 1. Based on the DNA analysis between the tested individual, Julian Croft, and the tested child, Leo Vance, the results support Julian Croft as the biological father of Leo Vance. The probability of paternity is 99.99%. Line 2. Based on the DNA analysis between the tested individual, Julian Croft, and the tested child, Lily Vance, the results support Julian Croft as the biological father of Lily Vance. The probability of paternity is 99.99%. The courtroom was silent for a second. Then Victoria stood up from the gallery, her face contorted with an emotion I had never seen before. Not victory, not pride, but a complex, almost twisted excitement. Her lips trembled, her eyes reddened. The woman who had always been so poised and superior now looked like all her protective shells had been stripped away, revealing a frail, anxious old woman. In a trembling voice, she said, "My grandson. My granddaughter. They are of the Croft bloodline." Julian didn't stand up. He sat there, staring at the report in his hands, his shoulders shaking slightly. He looked up, in my direction, his eyes shimmering with something. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't victory. It was more like the look of someone who suddenly realizes the floor beneath them isn't solid ground, but a thin sheet of ice, about to break. Judge Harmon said, "The report has been received by both parties. Petitioner Julian Croft, your petition was to confirm paternity. The report has now clearly established that paternity. That part of your petition has been satisfied. Do you have any additional claims?" Julian stood up, his voice still trembling, but he took a deep breath and steadied himself. He said, "Your Honor, I would like to add 2 claims to my original petition. First, I request the court to grant me visitation rights for Leo and Lily Vance once a week. Second, I request the court to affirm that I share joint legal custody of the 2 children." Before Judge Harmon could speak, Catherine was on her feet. "Your Honor, we object. The petitioner has not fulfilled any parental duties in the 10 years since the children's birth. According to the law, visitation rights are typically granted to non-custodial parents after a divorce. The parties in this case were never married, so the prerequisite for visitation does not apply. As for joint custody, the petitioner has never been a part of the children's lives. To suddenly demand custody is a serious threat to the well-being of the minors." Julian's lawyer, Mr. Harrison, stood up and said calmly, "Your Honor, we believe the opposing counsel's argument is biased. The reason Mr. Croft did not fulfill his parental duties for the past 10 years is because the respondent, Miss Alara Vance, deliberately concealed the children's existence. Mr. Croft did not want to be a parent. He simply did not know he was one. Under these circumstances, his legal rights cannot be stripped away based on a failure to fulfill duties. A child's development should not be without a father. This is a fundamental human principle." The 2 sides went back and forth for about 10 minutes. Judge Harmon listened attentively, not interrupting or showing any preference. When both sides had finished, he took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, a familiar gesture he made when facing a difficult case. He said, "The issues of visitation and custody in this case are complex. It is not appropriate to rule on them in court today. The court has decided to merge the dispute over visitation and custody with the jurisdictional issue. Until a final ruling is made, no arrangements for visitation or custody will be made." He struck his gavel. "This hearing is now concluded. You will be notified." Victoria shot up from the gallery, her voice losing control. "Judge Wallace, the results are out. The children are of our Croft family. Can't we even see them once?" Judge Harmon looked at her, his tone flat but firm. "Miss Croft, the court has its procedures. Until the issues of jurisdiction and custody are finally resolved, neither party can take matters into their own hands. If you have any further requests, you may express them through legal channels. Please leave." Victoria's lips trembled, but she ultimately said nothing. Julian helped her out of the courtroom. As he passed me, he hesitated, glancing at me. I thought he would say something harsh, but he said nothing. He just looked at me once and then looked away, walking on. That look was strange. Not hatred, not anger. It was more like something that had been crushed. Like an old tree, swaying one last time before it falls. 3 days later, the formal ruling from the Massachusetts Family and Probate Court was delivered to the New York court. The ruling was clear. The core dispute of this case involved the custody of 2 minors born in the United States, with U.S. citizenship. According to the Uniform Child Custody Jurisdiction and Enforcement Act, the Massachusetts court had exclusive jurisdiction over this case. The New York court was to terminate its proceedings and await the final judgment from the Massachusetts court. At the same time, the temporary restraining order issued by the Massachusetts court remained in effect, prohibiting Julian Croft from contacting or approaching the 2 children in any way during the proceedings. The ruling was bilingual, English, and a certified translation, followed by an authentication from the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court. The entire set of documents was over 300 pages long, every page stamped, signed, and authenticated as required. Watertight. The day Catherine submitted this document to Judge Wallace, Julian's lawyer withdrew all claims regarding visitation and custody in court. He didn't withdraw because he didn't want to fight anymore. He withdrew because he couldn't fight. With the Massachusetts court's ruling holding sway, he could file 100 lawsuits in New York. It would be useless. The jurisdiction was entirely in my hands. He didn't even have a ticket to the game. Judge Harmon signed the order, officially declaring the case transferred to the jurisdiction of the Massachusetts Family and Probate Court. Case closed. When I walked out of the courthouse that day, the sky was a brilliant blue. The snow from a few days ago had completely melted. The trees lining the street were beginning to sprout tender green buds. Spring always comes quickly in New York. The late January temperature had suddenly shot up into the 50s. The wind was no longer a knife, but carried a warm, moist touch. Julian was standing on the courthouse steps, without an umbrella. The sun shone on his face, illuminating the fine lines around his eyes and the few specks of gray at his temples. He looked 5 years older than he had just a couple of weeks ago. He watched me, but didn't approach. We were separated by about 30 feet of sidewalk, with people and cyclists passing between us. He said, "Alara, you won in New York." I said, "Mm-hmm." He said, "Can you let me see the children?" Just once. The sunlight fell on his face, making every pore visible. He stood there, no longer the dashing partner of the Croft firm, nor the aggressive elite lawyer in court. At this moment, he was just an exhausted middle-aged man, begging his ex-girlfriend to let him see his own children. I looked at him, and a wave of emotion stirred within me, but it was quickly suppressed by the inertia of 10 years. I said, "Julian, if you want to see the children, you can." His eyes lit up. "But there's one condition." His eyes dimmed again. I said, "You go to your mother. Have her take that $300,000 check to a notary and make a sworn statement, admitting that the money was a payoff to force me to break up with you. Not compensation, not a gift. Then you yourself go to the court and write a formal declaration, admitting that you verbally renounced your parental rights 10 years ago." The expression on his face slowly froze. "Alara, you're asking me to publicly admit these things?" I said, "Yes. This isn't to humiliate you. It's to let them know." "Leo asked me why you never came to find him. I told him it was because you weren't worthy. But if one day you want to see him, want him to call you dad, then you first have to let him know what his father did wrong, and then apologize to his face, sincerely." My tone was calm from start to finish, without a trace of emotion. "It's not that I don't hate you anymore, Julian. It's that for the past 10 years, every day, every time I see Leo's eyes, so much like yours, every time I see him frown in a way that's just like you, I remember what your mother said. She said I wasn't good enough for you. She said my family wasn't good enough for your family. 10 years have passed. I want you to know one thing." I put on my sunglasses and walked past him. It was never Alara Vance who wasn't good enough for Julian Croft. It was Julian Croft who was never good enough for Alara Vance, and certainly not good enough for these 2 children. You didn't raise them for a single day. You didn't stay up a single night when they were sick. You didn't fight for their future. You provided a single sperm. That doesn't make you a father. A biological father. That's all I can give you. My heels clicked on the pavement. Thud, thud, thud. Each step was clear and distinct. Behind me, his voice, half scattered by the wind, still caught up to me. "Alara, I won't give up. I'll go to Massachusetts too. I will fight to the end." I didn't turn back. Because even if you go to the ends of the earth, even if you stand at the gates of the Massachusetts courthouse, you won't win. The case is Alara Vance, fight. I have never lost. I won't make an exception for you. And the evidence I have is far more than just that one recording you've heard. If you ask me how long it takes to destroy a person, I used to say 10 years. Because 10 years ago, on that rainy night, Victoria Croft, with $300,000 and the words "you're not worthy," dismantled my entire world in a single evening. And it took me a full 10 years to put it back together. But today, I'll tell you, it only takes 3 minutes to destroy a person. Just long enough for a judge to strike a gavel and pronounce the death sentence on your career. The formal trial for the Vogel case was scheduled for the 14th of March 2024. I chose the date deliberately. On March 14th, 10 years ago, Victoria Croft slapped my Harvard acceptance letter on her coffee table and made me choose between my education and her son. 10 years later, on the same day, I stood in the same court, ready to erase the law firm she and her son had spent half their lives building, line by line, from the ledger. 3 days before the trial, I locked myself in my office and went through all the materials for the Vogel case one last time. 19 folders, arranged by exhibit number, from Exhibit 1 to Exhibit 19, containing the entire chain of evidence for Julian's unethical representation, conflict of interest, bad faith negotiations, and commercial fraud. But among these 19 pieces of evidence, there was one I had never mentioned in any setting. Not even Catherine knew of its existence. Exhibit 19. This document was not a contract, not a recording, not a meeting minute. It was a notarized copy of a bank transfer record. 10 years ago, Victoria Croft wrote that $300,000 check from her personal account. I had accepted it, but I never cashed it. I had always thought that check was just a tool she used to humiliate me. Until 2 years ago, while preparing the background investigation for the Vogel case, I unintentionally discovered a piece of information that made my pupils dilate. The account from which Victoria Croft had written that check was not her personal savings account. It was a client trust account held by the Croft firm in her name. The funds in this account were fiduciary funds held in trust for the firm's clients. Simply put, she had used client money to write that $300,000 check. Misappropriation of client trust funds. In the legal profession, the severity of this is equivalent to a surgeon intentionally severing the wrong blood vessel on the operating table. If proven, it wasn't just a matter of having her law license revoked. It was a violation of federal law, specifically embezzlement. A significant amount could lead to 3 to 7 years in prison. Victoria Croft probably never dreamed that the check she used to slap me in the face 10 years ago would, 10 years later, become the stone that crushed her own foot. And her son, Julian Croft, as a partner at the Croft firm, had a direct fiduciary duty to oversee the funds in that account. What was he doing when Victoria misappropriated the funds? How much did he know? Was he involved? Each of these 3 questions was enough to send him tumbling from his position as a partner at a top law firm, shattered beyond repair. But I had never brought out this evidence. Not in the paternity case. Not at the jurisdictional hearing. Because I was waiting for the perfect moment. A moment when he would have absolutely no way to fight back. That moment was today. On the morning of March 14th, I stood in front of the mirror, buttoning my suit. It was a dark gray suit, a shade deeper than the one from the first hearing, with a sharper cut. I paired it with black stiletto heels. My hair was pulled back completely, revealing my jawline. My lipstick was a matte, dark red. Like the fierce battle set to begin, it was not flamboyant, but sharp enough. Chloe was waiting for me downstairs. When she opened the car door, she glanced at me. "Alara, you have a different aura today." I said, "How so?" She thought for a moment and found the words, like a sword that's already been unsheathed. I smiled and got in the car. Outside the car window, New York spring had just begun to show. The magnolia trees along the road were covered in fuzzy buds, ready to bloom in a few days. I was suddenly reminded of the spring in Boston. The magnolias along the Charles River bloomed a month later than in New York, but their blooming season was longer, more vibrant. During my 3 years at Harvard, every spring I would take the 2 children to see the flowers by the river. Lily would sit in her stroller, waving her hands at the white petals on the trees, shouting, "Mommy, Mommy, flowers!" Leo, on the other hand, would correct her with a serious face. "That's not just a flower. It's a magnolia tree, Mommy. I read it in a book." At 3 years old, he had just learned to use Wikipedia and wanted to stuff the knowledge of the entire world into his little head. Maria always said Leo was just like me, too competitive, talking like a little adult at such a young age. I never told her that his competitive spirit was actually inherited from someone else. But that person used his drive to climb the social ladder and look down on others. My son, I hoped, would use it for better things. The hearing was at 9 a.m. We arrived at the courthouse at 8:40, 20 minutes early, just like the first time. Today's courtroom was larger than the last, a grand chamber reserved for major commercial cases. The gallery had 8 rows and could seat over 100 people. When we arrived, it was already more than half full. I glanced around and saw several familiar faces. People from the Croft firm, the head of legal for Vogel Industries in the U.S., a few executives from Apex Motors, and a few colleagues from other multinational law firms I knew from my time in America, likely drawn by the case's high profile. The most prominent figure was still Victoria Croft. She sat in the middle of the second row, this time in a black suit. Her hair was dyed darker, her makeup thicker, but it couldn't hide the wrinkles and sagging skin around her eyes. Next to her sat the partner, Mr. Davies, and several other senior lawyers from the Croft firm. Her posture was still rigid, her spine straight, her chin slightly raised, just as it was when I first met her, but I noticed her hands. They were clasped on her lap, her fingers unconsciously twisting together. 10 years had passed. Her shell was still hard, but the inside was starting to crumble. Julian was sitting in the counsel's chair next to the defendant's table, the exact same spot as last time. The last time he sat there, he was the dashing partner of the Croft firm. Today, he sat there as a lawyer whose eligibility to practice was under court review. He still wore that navy suit, but his shoulders seemed to have slumped. The color of his tie was a shade darker. He looked like a piece of paper that had been crumpled and then smoothed out, superficially flat but full of wrinkles upon closer inspection. The assistant next to him was no longer the young lawyer from last time, but a young woman who looked like she had just graduated. The Vogel case had probably become too hot to handle, and no one at the Croft firm was willing to share the blame with him. When I entered the courtroom, he looked. His gaze was complex. There was caution, exhaustion, and something else I couldn't quite decipher, but it was just a glance. He quickly looked down and started flipping through his documents. His hand wasn't steady. The pen trembled slightly between his fingers. I withdrew my gaze and sat down at my table. At 9 a.m. sharp, Judge Wallace entered. All rise, be seated. Judge Wallace wore a dark tie today, his expression more serious than the previous 2 times. He set down his gavel, adjusted his glasses, and said, "We will now continue the hearing in the case of Apex Motors versus Vogel Industries. There are 3 main points of contention in this case. First, the issue of the defense counsel Julian Croft's eligibility to represent. Second, whether the defendant engaged in bad faith negotiations and commercial fraud. Third, the method for calculating the plaintiff's damages." He looked in Julian's direction, his voice calm but with an undeniable weight. "Mr. Croft, regarding your eligibility to represent, at the last hearing, the plaintiff submitted evidence proving that while representing Vogel Industries, you also provided legal services to a competitor, Synergy Drive, creating a conflict of interest. The plaintiff later submitted additional audio evidence proving you accessed and obtained core technical secrets from Synergy Drive. Do you have anything to say about this evidence?" Julian stood up and cleared his throat. His voice was steady enough, but a careful listener could detect a slight tremor. He said, "Your Honor, regarding my eligibility, I have already submitted a written statement to the court. I admit that during the period I represented Vogel Industries, I also served as legal counsel for Synergy Drive. However, my scope of representation was limited to labor and employment matters and did not involve any commercial contracts or technical secrets. As for the audio evidence submitted by the opposing counsel, I have already filed an objection with the court. The recording was made without the consent of the parties, and its legality and authenticity are questionable. I request the court to not admit this recording as evidence." Judge Wallace pushed up his glasses and looked at me. "Miss Vance, do you have a response to Mr. Croft's objection to the audio evidence?" I stood up, holding folder number 8. "Your Honor, regarding the legality of the audio evidence, we have already provided a detailed explanation in our supplemental evidence list. First, the recording was made on the 19th of February 2023 in a public area of the Synergy Drive cafeteria. According to the federal rules of evidence, recordings made in a public space do not constitute an infringement of another's legal rights and are admissible. Second, the person who made the recording," I paused, "was an employee in the Synergy Drive cafeteria. During his normal work, in a public area, He inadvertently overheard the conversation between Mr. Croft and Synergy Drive's CTO, Mark Jensen. Recognizing the discussion involved corporate espionage, she recorded it out of a civic duty to prevent a crime. This act of recording neither infringed on anyone's right to privacy nor violated any laws. I put down the folder and looked directly at Judge Wallace. Your Honor, the opposing counsel questions the authenticity of the recording. However, we have submitted the original audio file to a certified forensic data analysis center for voice print identification and timestamp verification. The expert conclusion clearly confirms that the male voice in the recording perfectly matches Mr. Croft's voice print characteristics, and that the audio file has not been edited, spliced, or tampered with in any way. The expert report has been submitted to the court as Plaintiff's Exhibit 10A. Julian's face changed. He probably hadn't expected me to go as far as getting a voice print analysis. Judge Wallace reviewed the report I mentioned, his brow slightly furrowed. He looked up at Julian. Mr. Croft, have you seen this report? Julian said, his voice strained. I have. But I maintain my objection. Voice print analysis itself has a margin of error. Judge Wallace didn't let him finish, cutting him off with a raised hand, his voice colder. Mr. Croft, this report is from a nationally accredited center. The margin of error is less than 1 in 1,000. If you want to challenge this report, you need to provide counter-evidence of equal weight, not just empty words. We'll leave that there for now. He closed the report, took off his glasses, wiped them, and put them back on. His gaze fell on me. Miss Vance, regarding Mr. Croft's eligibility to represent, besides the conflict of interest and the audio evidence, do you have any other evidence to add? I knew this was the moment. I said, I do. I picked up the last folder on the table, number 19. This folder was thinner than the previous 18. Inside was just one piece of paper, a thin, pale blue piece of paper. I said, Your Honor, I apply to submit Plaintiff's Exhibit 19. This evidence concerns the defendant's counsel's mother, Miss Victoria Croft, director of the Croft firm, and the financial irregularities of the Croft firm itself. This evidence will directly prove that not only does Mr. 40-Croft have a serious issue with his eligibility to represent, but his law firm itself poses a significant legal risk and is completely unsuitable to continue representing in this case. A stir went through the courtroom. The people from the Croft firm in the gallery exchanged worried glances, whispering among themselves. Victoria Croft's face turned white as a sheet. She instinctively gripped the armrest of her chair, leaning forward slightly, her lips moving but no sound coming out. Judge Wallace signaled the bailiff to take the document from my hand. He took the paper, looked at it for about 10 seconds, and then he took off his glasses. This time, the movement was different. It was slow, heavy, as if he were trying to press something down with his fingers. He looked up, his face expressionless, but his voice was noticeably a few shades deeper. Miss Vance, this transfer record shows that on the 12th of March 2014, Victoria Croft wrote a check for $300,000 from a Chase Bank account, payable to you. What does this have to do with this case? The courtroom fell silent. More than 100 people held their breath at once, so quiet you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. I said, Your Honor, the payee of this check is indeed me, but I must explain to the court the source of this check. I opened the folder to the second page, a bank account information query result. This account, although opened in Victoria Croft's name, was not her personal savings account. It was a client trust account of the Croft firm. The money in this account was fiduciary funds held in trust for the firm's clients. I paused for a second, letting the information sink in. Your Honor, on the 12th of March 2014, Victoria Croft wrote a personal check for $300,000 from this trust account. The payee was me. The purpose, I tapped my finger on the blank memo line on the transfer record, was not filled in. In other words, Miss Victoria Croft used client trust funds for personal purposes. And according to the ABA Model Rules of Professional Conduct, specifically Rule 1.15 and federal criminal statutes, misappropriating client trust funds, especially a substantial amount, constitutes embezzlement. The courtroom exploded. Nearly everyone in the gallery shot to their feet. The lawyers from the Croft firm were pale. The partner, Mr. Davies, grabbed Victoria's arm, his lips trembling as he said something. Victoria sat frozen in her seat. All the color drained from her face. Even her lips were white. The shoulders she had always held so high finally slumped, like a broken pillar crashing down. Julian shot up, his voice completely out of control. Alara, you're insane. That was my mother's own money. It has nothing to do with a trust account. You're slandering her. Judge Wallace slammed his gavel 3 times. Hard. Quiet. Any more outbursts and the bailiffs will remove you. Mr. Croft, you are still an officer of the court. Remember your position. Julian sat down, breathing heavily, his chest heaving. His face was flushed as if it had been scorched. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles as white as bone. He stared at me, and I couldn't quite make out the emotions churning in his eyes. Perhaps it was anger. Perhaps it was fear. Perhaps it was all the things he had suppressed for 10 years. All the things he had never dared to face, all surging up at once. Judge Wallace looked at me. Miss Vance, do you have other evidence to corroborate the connection between this check and the trust account? I said, I do. Exhibit 19, Appendix 3, is a letter from Chase Bank confirming the nature of the account. Exhibit 19, Appendix 4, is the sworn testimony of 3 former clients of the Croft firm, confirming they had deposited trust funds into that account. Exhibit 19, Appendix 5, is an excerpt from the audit working papers of the New York State Bar Association's 2023 annual audit of the Croft firm, which found multiple irregular fund transfers. I said it all in one breath, my tone remaining almost mechanically calm from start to finish. Every appendix number, every document title, every source of evidence was a nail, hammered one by one into the coffin of the Croft firm. Your Honor, I will not speculate as to what Victoria Croft used this money for 10 years ago, but today, this bank record clearly proves that the Croft firm has major irregularities in its financial management. A law firm suspected of misappropriating funds, a law firm currently being audited by the Bar Association, is it qualified to continue representing in this cross-border merger and acquisition case with a value of over $800 million? We once again moved to disqualify the Croft firm and Julian Croft from representing the defendant. Judge Wallace was silent for a long time. He looked down at the document spread before him, his fingers tapping lightly on the tabletop. 1, 2, 3. The entire courtroom was enveloped in a tense silence. Everyone was waiting for his decision. Finally, the defendant's counsel, Julian Croft, not only has a conflict of interest and engaged in unethical practices in his representation, but his law firm is also suspected of major financial mismanagement. He picked up his gavel. This court hereby rules to disqualify Mr. Julian Croft and the Croft firm from representing the defendant in this case. Regarding the suspicion that the Croft firm misappropriated client trust funds, this court will, in accordance with the law, refer the relevant materials to the New York State Department of Financial Services and the Bar Association for investigation. The gavel fell with a dull thud. Thud. That strike didn't just hit the sound block, it hit the heart of the Croft firm. In the gallery, Victoria Croft swayed, then slumped sideways like a pile of soft clay. Mr. Davies frantically tried to support her. The other lawyers rushed over in a panic. Someone shouted to call 911. Someone was rummaging through a bag for medicine. Julian didn't move. He sat at his table, his hands flat on the surface, motionless. His face was no longer red. After the blood had drained away, all that was left was a translucent, ghastly white. He stared into the empty air, his eyes vacant, like a man who suddenly realizes he has been swimming in the ocean for a long time, only to turn back and find the shore has vanished, and the shore ahead never existed. The mountain he had spent 34 years climbing had been razed to the ground by me in 3 minutes. As I packed my documents, Chloe was beside me, her eyes red with excitement. She whispered, Alara, we won. We won. He's disqualified. Vogel will have to find a new lawyer tomorrow. All the terms we negotiated will have to be thrown out. Apex Motors' chances of winning have at least doubled. I said, file these documents away when we get back. I wasn't celebrating, not because I wasn't happy, but because this victory was just the first course of the day. Julian losing his right to represent, the Croft firm being referred for investigation for me, these were never the end goal. They were just steps leading to the end. That end was 2 days from now, in the Massachusetts Family and Probate Court. Julian was right. He would go to Massachusetts to fight. On March 16th, the court would hold a hearing on the final ruling for custody and visitation rights. I wasn't just going to strip him of his right to practice in a New York court. I was going to strip him of his right to be a father in a Massachusetts court. When I walked out of the courthouse doors, the March sunlight poured down, warm on my skin. The magnolias in New York had finally bloomed. The 2 rows of magnolia trees in front of the courthouse seemed to have bloomed overnight, covered in white flowers, like fluffy clouds against the blue sky. I stood on the steps and took a deep breath. The air smelled of flowers, of sunshine, and a faint hint of fresh grass. Spring had finally arrived. Behind me, I heard a rush of footsteps. It was Julian. He chased after me, alone. His coat was open, his tie half loosened, his hair a mess from the wind. He stood about 10 feet away from me, panting, his eyes as red as if they were about to bleed. He said, "Alara, stop." I turned to look at him. The sun was behind me, casting a shadow over his face. He stood in the shadow, like a half-collapsed building. His voice was shaking, not with anger, but with the kind of tremor that seeps from the bones when a person reaches a dead end. "Alara, you've ruined me. You've ruined my mother. You've ruined the Croft firm. Are you satisfied?" I looked at him and said nothing. He took a step forward, his voice as hoarse as sandpaper on rough concrete. "That check? You took it back then. Why didn't you cash it? If you had taken the money then, none of this would have happened today. You kept it for 10 years. You were just waiting for today, weren't you?" He was right. I kept it for 10 years, waiting for today. But I had no obligation to answer his question. I looked at him and said in a very calm voice, "Julian, are you finished?" His eyes were wet. Not the kind of crying where tears fall, but his eyes were completely red, something shimmering within them that never fell. He gritted his teeth, his voice almost broken. "I want to see the children. Please, let me see them. Just once." I looked at him, at this 3-4-year-old man standing in the sunlight, begging me to let him see the children he had said he didn't want 10 years ago. The sun was bright. The magnolias were in full bloom. Spring was just around the corner, but none of it seemed to have anything to do with him anymore. "Julian, the hearing in Massachusetts is in 2 days. If you want to fight, then fly there and fight. As for today," I glanced at my watch, the same gesture, the same tone as when I said it after the first hearing. "I have to leave now to make it in time to pick up my kids. Mr. Croft, if you'll excuse me." I turned and walked down the steps, my heels clicking sharply on the granite. Chloe was already holding the back door of the car open for me. I bent down, got in, and the door closed, sealing out all the noise from outside. As the car pulled away, I glanced out the tinted window. Julian was still standing on the courthouse steps, alone. The wind whipped his coat, his hair flying in a mess. He stood there, motionless, like a forgotten signpost, pointing to a road he could never return to. I looked away and leaned back in my seat, closing my eyes. "You think this is over? Julian, in 2 days, in Massachusetts, you will see a version of me that is even more ruthless than today. Because in that courtroom, I won't just be fighting for your right to practice. I'll be fighting for your right to be a father." The hearing in the Massachusetts Family and Probate Court was scheduled for 10 a.m. East Coast time on March 16th. I flew in a day early, bringing the children with me. They were U.S. citizens, and they needed to be back in the U.S. every so often anyway. This time, it worked out perfectly. Catherine didn't fly with me. She stayed in New York to handle the aftermath of the Vogel case. Here in Massachusetts, my case was being handled by the legal team I had worked with for 10 years. The lead counsel was a woman named Catherine, an old-timer with silver hair, who spoke in a slow, measured tone. But she had been fighting custody cases in the Massachusetts Family and Probate Court for 40 years and had never lost one. When Catherine picked me up at the airport, she gave me a hug, then bent down to the 2 little people dragging their mini suitcases. "You must be Leo and Lily. Your mother talks about you so much on the phone, my ears are about to fall off." Lily called out sweetly, "Hello, Grandma Catherine." Leo, however, extended his right hand and said in perfect English, "A pleasure to meet you, Miss Catherine." Catherine shook his hand, a flash of surprise in her eyes. She looked up at me. "This one is even less like a 10-year-old than you described." I said, "I know." On the day of the hearing, it was raining lightly in Boston. The April air was still cool. The fine rain slanted in the wind, pattering against the gray granite walls of the courthouse. This building was over 100 years old. Every stone had witnessed countless battles over marriages, property, and children. Today, it was about to witness one more. Julian came. He came alone, without a lawyer. He probably couldn't find a lawyer in Massachusetts willing to take the case. After all, the court's jurisdictional ruling had blocked all his paths. He wore a dark suit, no tie, the top button of his shirt undone. He looked even more haggard than he had in New York. His eyes were sunken, a bluish stubble on his chin. He probably flew coach for over a dozen hours. His money and resources had evaporated along with the Croft firm. He couldn't even afford business class anymore. We made eye contact across the hallway. His eyes no longer held anger or questions, just the numb exhaustion of someone who has reached their limit. Like a runner who has been running for a very, very long time, only to see the finish line and realize it's the edge of a cliff. Catherine led the argument. Her style was completely different from mine. I fight a case like a sword. Sharp, direct. Every move fatal. She fights a case like water, slow, steady, seeping into every crack, silently drowning all the opponent's escape routes. By the time you realize it, you have no room to breathe. She spent a full hour presenting 3 core arguments to the judge. First, Julian had explicitly expressed his intention to waive his parental rights before the children were born. The audio evidence had been accepted by the New York court, and the Massachusetts court had also notarized and authenticated it. It had full legal force. Second, in the first 10 years of the children's lives, Julian had never fulfilled any parental duties, nor had he ever tried to contact or learn about the children. He wasn't prevented from doing so. He simply never acted. Third, and this was the most devastating point, Catherine presented a professional evaluation report from a child psychologist. The report showed that the children were currently psychologically healthy and stable, with a clear understanding of their situation. During his evaluation, Leo explicitly stated that he knew Julian was his biological father, but he did not consider this person to be his dad. And Lily said something that silenced the entire courtroom. Catherine played a clip from the evaluation video in court. On the screen, Lily was sitting on a small, colorful chair, her legs swinging. The evaluator asked her, "Do you want to meet your biological father?" Lily tilted her head and thought for a moment. In that uniquely innocent way that only children have, untainted by any adult logic, she said, "I don't want to see him, because he made my mommy cry. I've never seen my mommy cry. But Maria said that mommy used to cry a lot because of him. I don't want to see someone who makes my mommy cry." The courtroom was silent for a full 10 seconds. The judge, a woman in her 50s, wore a pair of horn-rimmed glasses, her expression as serious as a granite statue. But after Lily's words, she took off her glasses and wiped them, a careful, gentle motion, as if afraid of breaking something. Julian sat across from us, his hands clasped on the table, his head down. I couldn't see his expression, but I could see his shoulders shaking slightly. Under that expensive suit, the frame of a grown man was slowly collapsing. The judge finally made her ruling. This court rules that the full legal and physical custody of the 2 minor children of the petitioner, Julian Croft, and the respondent, Alara Vance, is hereby granted to the respondent, Alara Vance. The petitioner, Julian Croft, shall not have any rights of custody, visitation, or any form of contact with the children. The petitioner is prohibited from approaching or contacting the 2 children in any way until they reach the age of majority. If the petitioner violates this order, he will face criminal charges for contempt of court. The gavel fell, as heavy, as final as the one in New York 3 days ago. Within 3 days, in 2 cities, 2 courtrooms, 2 gavels had sealed off his last 2 paths. When I walked out of the courthouse, the rain was still falling. The April rain in Boston wasn't heavy, but it was a fine, dense mist that was cool but not cold on the face. Julian was standing under the portico at the courthouse entrance, without an umbrella. Rainwater dripped from the edge of the portico, splashing into small puddles at his feet. He saw me come out, took a half step forward, and then stopped. We were separated by 3 steps. The rain had made the steps wet and shiny, reflecting the gray sky and the mottled stone walls of the courthouse. He opened his mouth, as if he wanted to say many things, but in the end, he only said one thing. "Alara, I really didn't know." He didn't specify what he didn't know. That I was pregnant back then? That his mother's money came from a questionable source? What it meant to lose a person and 2 children? Or did he not know what kind of person he himself was? Perhaps all of the above. I said, "Julian, now you know." He stood there, the rain soaking his hair, his shoulders, his well-shined shoes that had walked too long in the Boston rain. That once dashing face was now like an empty container. He said, "I have nothing left. The firm is being investigated. My license is suspended. My mother has been indicted. The children don't want me. What do I have left in this life?" I gave him one last look. This man, who I had once loved with all my youth, the biological father of my 2 children. The man who, on that rainy night 10 years ago, had silently watched his mother humiliate me without a word. His current state was the result of his own actions, step by step. Every step was taken on a choice he made 10 years ago. Julian, you ask me what you have left? You have what your mother said back then. She said, you need a wife who can manage your public image and social connections. Now you have no public image, and you don't need any connections. You can finally be yourself. The rest, you can figure out on your own. I opened my umbrella and walked into the fine April rain of Boston. Catherine was waiting for me in the car. In the back seat, Leo and Lily sat side by side, each holding a slice of pizza. Lily had tomato sauce on her face, and Leo was wiping it off with a napkin, a look of disgust on his face. As he wiped, he said, Lily, do you eat with your face or your mouth? Lily said, both, with perfect conviction. Leo rolled his eyes and pressed the napkin into her hand. Wipe it yourself. I opened the passenger door and sat down. Catherine glanced at me in the rearview mirror and said in her slow, measured voice, It's all over. I said, It's all over. The car pulled out of the courthouse parking lot and merged into the ceaseless flow of Manhattan traffic. The windshield wipers swung back and forth rhythmically, wiping away one layer of rain only for another to fall. Like time itself, repeating, never stopping. My phone lit up. It was a message from Catherine. Just one sentence. The Joint Investigation Team from the Department of Financial Services and the Bar Association officially entered the Croft firm this morning. The news is already trending. I replied with one word. Good. Then I flipped my phone over, screen down, on my lap. The rain was still falling outside the window. The New York skyline was hazy in the mist. The tip of the Empire State Building was hidden in the clouds, only the light at the very top blinking through the fog. Like a lighthouse. 10 years ago, when I came to this city with 2 unborn children, I had nothing. In my pocket was a $300,000 check and an unwanted motherhood. 10 years later, I stood in the same city, having everything I wanted. The case Alara Vance fought was won. Not just one battle, but the entire war. That night back home, after I had put the children to sleep, I sat alone in my study. Outside the window were the never-extinguishing lights of New York. The tip of the Empire State Building blinked in the night, like a lighthouse. My phone rang again. A screenshot from Catherine. A trending topics page. Number 7. The Croft firm under investigation. Number 19. Alara Vance. Vogel case. Below the screenshot, Catherine had added a sentence. You're famous. Your appearance fee in the US is going to at least triple. I smiled but didn't reply. Then I opened my laptop and logged into my professional networking profile. My bio hadn't been updated in a long time. I stared at the line for a long time. Partner, Sterling and Gould. Chief International Counsel. I added 4 more words at the end. Never lost a case. I closed the laptop, and from my drawer, I took out the civil law textbook with the $300,000 check inside. The check was still tucked in the flyleaf. The paper had yellowed, the edges slightly curled. The writing was a bit faded, but Victoria Croft's signature and the account number ending in 3/8 were still clear. I took out the check and, for the first time in 10 years, wrote a line on the back. $300,000 received. The rest, I've collected myself. Then I put the check into the paper shredder. The machine whirred for a few seconds, and the thin blue paper turned into a pile of fine confetti. Along with 10 years of resentment, it disappeared completely into the New York night. Outside, the light on the Empire State Building blinked one last time, then went out. New York was asleep, but my alarm hadn't gone off yet. Tomorrow, I had to take the children to a training camp for the New York Youth Robotics Competition. Leah was the team captain. Lily was the cheerleader. And I had to go to the airport to pick up a client flying in from London to discuss a cross-border acquisition case worth over $2 billion. My phone screen lit up again, a message from Chloe in New York. Alara, I've sent the materials for the hearing the day after tomorrow to your email. Please take a look when you have a moment. It was the new case I had taken. A domestic e-commerce giant suing a multinational retail group for antitrust violations. The amount in dispute was $13 billion. I replied with one word. Good. Then I turned off the light in my study and walked into the children's bedroom. Leo was sleeping soundly, his blanket tucked in neatly, his breathing even. Lily had kicked her blanket aside, one leg dangling off the edge of the bed, her mouth slightly open, a glistening trail of drool at the corner. I gently put her leg back under the covers and tucked her in again. I kissed each of them on the forehead. Good night, my whole world. 10 years ago, on that rainy night, Victoria Croft said, "You're not good enough for my son." Today I say, my children, your mother is Alara Vance, one of the best female lawyers in America. She has never lost. You are the children who least need a father in this world. Because your mother, alone, is an army, and that army has another war to fight tomorrow. Never lost a case. Those 4 words aren't just a tagline in a bio. They are the mark carved into my bones from every late night at the office, every courtroom battle, every step of the road I walked alone, carrying 2 children, for the past 10 years.